Ever stop to think that the most fundamental shapes might hold the secrets to some seriously advanced technology?
Mm.
Okay, you're in the right place because today we're plunging into the fascinating world of the three-dimensional golden rhombus, or, the 3D GR.
Right.
Now, I know that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, and, well, in a way, it is cutting-edge stuff.
It definitely have that feel.
But what's blowing my mind is how this very specific geometric form, rooted in the elegant golden ratio, appears in the most surprisingly practical and diverse applications according to what we've been looking at.
Exactly. It's quite something.
We're talking about new ways to store energy, revolutionary manufacturing techniques, even how information could be processed, and, well, let's just say some potentially game-changing applications in other fields, including even a unique form of communication.
It really covers a lot of ground.
So our mission on this deep dive is to unpack the core of this 3D GR, what makes it tick structurally, and then explore the incredibly varied ways it's being utilized. What are the fundamental principles at play, and what kind of potential are we looking at here?
What's truly captivating, I think, is how taking a basic geometric shape, like a rhombus, and extending it into 3 dimensions, then precisely shaping it with the golden ratio, well, it transforms it into a foundational component for a remarkable range of advanced technologies.
Yeah.
The material we've explored really paints a picture of something incredibly versatile at a fundamental level.
Absolutely. So let's really get our heads around this shape. What exactly are we talking about when we say three-dimensional golden rhombus?
Essentially, the 3D GR is a 3-dimensional solid formed by the precise connection of 6 individual golden rhombi.
Okay.
Imagine taking 6 diamond-shaped faces and fitting them together in 3-dimensional space to create a single unified form. Key to understanding it are its 8 points, or vertices, the 12 equal lines, or edges, that connect these points, and the 6 faces themselves. And these aren't just any faces. They each have a specific number, color, and an associated symbolic action or direction.
Action or direction. Interesting. We'll definitely need to circle back to that.
Oh, absolutely. We'll dive deeper into those attributes shortly.
Okay, so 6 rhombies coming together in a specific way. Now, you mentioned the golden ratio. We hear that term a lot. Why is it so crucial to this particular structure?
Well, the golden ratio, which is roughly 1.618, it's absolutely fundamental, not just aesthetically, but functionally.
Functionally. How so?
It dictates the precise proportions within each of the 6 rhombic faces and the spatial relationships between them in the 3D GR. This specific ratio isn't just about creating a visually pleasing shape. Mathematically, it contributes to the structure's inherent stability and the harmonious distribution of forces within it. Think of it as a kind of mathematical sweet spot for structural integrity, which becomes incredibly important when we consider its applications at very, very small scales.
So it's not just a nice number. It has a real impact on how the shape holds together and behaves. Now, the details we've seen get pretty granular about the dimensions. What kind of scale are we talking about here?
Indeed. The length of each of the 12 equal edges of the 3D GR is approximately 2.84 nanometers.
Nanometers. Wow.
Yeah. Now, to put that into perspective, a nanometer is a billionth of a meter, incredibly tiny.
Right.
Interestingly, this length closely matches the typical bond length between carbon atoms in graphene, which kind of hints at the materials involved in its construction.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Each of the 6 rhombic faces has a longer diagonal of about 4.59 nanometers and a shorter diagonal of 2.84 nanometers.
Same as the edge length for the shorter one.
Exactly. And the angles within these rhombic faces are also precise. 120 degrees opposite the longer diagonal and 60 degrees opposite the shorter one. These specific angles are critical for how the 6 rhombi fit together perfectly in 3 dimensions to form the 3D GR.
Nanometers. So we're operating at an almost atomic level in some of these applications. Now, let's talk about these number side color faces. That sounds really unique.
Yeah, this is where the 3D GR takes on a layer of complexity and potential functionality beyond just its geometry. Each of the 6 faces isn't just a flat surface. It's encoded with specific information. A color, a number, and a symbolic action or direction associated with it.
Like a code on each side.
Kind of. The top face, for example, is yellow and bears the number 1, and it's linked to the actions lunge and strike.
Okay.
The front right face is red, number 2, and signifies movement rightward and clockwise. Opposite this, on the front left, is the blue face 3, representing leftward and anti-rotary movement.
Anti-rotary.
Then we have the bottom face, colored purple and numbered 7, which is associated with grounding, foundation, and stabilization.
7. Why 7, I wonder?
That's a good question. The numbering isn't strictly sequential 1 through 6. Then the back right face is orange 8, again indicating rightward movement, but this time with anti-rotary.
Okay.
And finally, the back left face is green 9, associated with leftward and clockwise motion.
Wow, so it's like each side has a built-in instruction manual or a specific role to play within a larger system. It's not just geometry.
Exactly. And the 3D-GR isn't just about these individual coded faces. The overall structure exhibits certain symmetries, meaning parts of it are mirror images of other parts, but also an inherent asymmetry due to the differing lengths of the diagonals in the rhombic faces.
Right, because of the golden ratio proportions.
Precisely. Furthermore, it possesses a fascinating fractal characteristic. A single 3D-GR can, in theory, be subdivided into 27 smaller 3D-GRs that are self-similar in their geometry.
27, like a 3 by 3 by 3 cube of them.
Sort of conceptually, yes. This self-similarity at different scales could be incredibly significant for how these structures can interact and be used in complex systems, potentially allowing for scalability and intricate network formation.
Okay, so we have this incredibly precise geometric shape with these unique, almost coded faces. Now, how are these things actually constructed? What materials are involved in bringing a 3D GR to life?
Well, the incorporation of advanced materials is absolutely key to realizing the potential of the 3D GR. Our sources place a strong emphasis on the strategic integration of graphene.
Ah, graphene. Of
Yeah.
course, the wonder material.
Pretty much. Graphene bonds are specifically incorporated along the 12 edges of the 3D GR. This is vital because graphene is renowned for its exceptional strength, durability, stability, and its remarkable ability to conduct electricity.
Makes sense.
In fact, the term three-dimensional graphene rhombus itself highlights the crucial role of this material in its construction and properties.
Right, right. So the very framework of the 3D GR benefits from its amazing properties. And I also came across mention of graphene aerogel. What's that about?
Yes, in certain applications, particularly in the context of the 3DGR battery, graphene aerogel serves as a high-density electrolyte.
The electrolyte. That's the stuff ions move through in a battery.
Exactly. Think of an electrolyte in a battery as the medium that allows ions to move between the electrodes. Graphene aerogel's unique, highly porous structure enables the rapid and efficient transport of these ions, which is crucial for achieving high performance in battery technology.
Okay, so we understand the shape and the materials. Now for the really exciting part. What can you actually do with a 3D GR? Our sources outlined a pretty mind-boggling range of applications. Let's start with energy systems. This 3D GR battery sounds intriguing. How does the 3D GR structure contribute to a battery?
Well, the specific geometry of the 3D-GR provides an ideal framework for a novel approach to battery technology. The precise arrangement of the 6 golden rhombi, combined with the unique properties of the materials, facilitates efficient energy storage and release. In essence, a 3D-GR battery utilizes a core built from this 3D-GR structure.
Right.
The graphene bonds provide the necessary structural integrity and electrical conductivity. The graphene aerogel acts as the high-performance electrolyte, allowing for rapid ion flow. And the positive and negative electrodes, the cathode and anode, are integrated at the 8 vertices of the 3D-GR.
At the points.
Yes, in specific configurations tailored to the battery's design requirements. So the shape isn't just a container, it actively contributes to the battery's function.
So the shape itself helps optimize how the battery works. That's a clever bit of design. What about next? Additive manufacturing, you mentioned the AMIS system. How does the 3D-GR fit into that picture?
Okay, so the 3D-GR serves as the fundamental building block within the Additive Manufacturing Information System, or AMIS.
Yep.
Imagine a nanoscale construction system where 3D-GR units can self-assemble into complex structures. Within AMIS, these 3D-GRs organize themselves into what are called neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods. Okay.
These typically consist of a central anchoring 3D-GR and surrounding additional 3D-GRs, which in this context are sometimes referred to as synchronic swords, acting as further building elements.
Synchronic swords, that's a specific term.
It is. And the colored and numbered faces we discussed earlier act as highly specific binding points, almost like coded connectors.
Ah, the number side color faces again?
Exactly. They dictate the precise geometric orientation when these 3D-GR units are joined together during the manufacturing process, ensuring accuracy and the formation of intended designs.
It's like a super advanced molecular level Lego system where the faces tell you exactly how the pieces lock together.
That's That's a very apt analogy, actually. Complex three-dimensional structures are built up iteratively by attaching these additional 3D GRs to the anchoring 3D GR.
Oh.
This attachment can occur in inverted or other specific orientations, all governed by principles derived from the golden ratio, or rather, phi-based principles.
Phi, right, the golden ratio symbol.
Yes. This allows for the creation of incredibly intricate and efficient structures, such as Fibonacci lattices patterns based on the Fibonacci sequence or fractal architectures, all emerging from these fundamental 3D GR units.
That's mind-boggling. From batteries to essentially 3D printing materials at the nanoscale. Now, our sources also touched on signaling, computation, and even this concept of artificial citizenry. That sounds pretty far out.
It certainly ventures into highly advanced concepts, yeah.
Yeah.
But the underlying principles are rooted in the 3D GR's unique structure and its capacity for interaction.
Okay.
In the context of signaling networks, the additional 3D GRs can be used to resolve binary information. Think of them acting like nanoscale switches or logic gates.
Little tiny computer parts.
Kind of. The central anchoring 3D GR then processes these inputs, generating signaling pathways that can propagate across these interconnected 3D GR neighborhoods, creating complex and potentially adaptive information processing networks.
So they can essentially communicate and make decisions at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
That's wow.
Precisely. And when we delve into the idea of machine units for artificial citizens, we're looking at a conceptual layered architecture built around the 3D GR framework.
Clear of how.
There's a central radiation core, envisioned as the 3D GR surrounded by 26 others.
The 27 fractal components again?
Seems related, yes. This core emits a computational output. It's integrated with an interactant body, described as a fractal network of 3D GRs designed for parallel processing, and an array of 54 dendritic arms that act as signal receivers for communication between these units.
54 arms.
Okay. The ultimate vision seems to be of modular, fractal-based artificial citizens with their energy storage, structural integrity, and computational abilities all intrinsically linked at this fundamental 3D GR level.
That's incredible. From the incredibly tiny to potentially complex self-sustaining systems, all stemming from this one shape. Now, our sources also delved into some, let's call them applied applications in the realm of weaponry. What role does the 3D GR play there?
Well, within the framework presented by our sources, particularly attributed to an individual named Scar,
Right.
the 3D GR appears as a foundational element in various weapon system designs. For example, there are descriptions of synchronic swords named Tempo and Rhythm, which are presented as mirrored weapons based on the 3D GR structure.
Mirrored, like left and right hand versions.
That seems to be the implication. These swords are said to incorporate the 6 face, color, and number attributes, suggesting these attributes might influence their function or handling somehow.
Okay.
Another example is Scathe, described as a blade featuring a 3D GR pommel grip that utilizes 5 of the face color attributes, perhaps indicating different grip orientations or functionalities linked to these colors.
A 3D GR pommel.
Even a bladed bow is mentioned, incorporating a central 3D GR nook and a string, seemingly made of refined 3D GR units along the bow structure.
Okay, so it sounds like the shape isn't just a passive component, it's actively integrated into the design and potentially the function of these weapons. But there was also mention of an anchoring 3D GR heart. That sounds like a very specific connection.
Yes, this is described as a 3D GR unit that is intended to be bound to the chest, specifically at the location corresponding to the purple 7 bottom face.
The grounding phase.
Exactly. This anchored 3D GR is presented as a fixed point for kinetic interaction during combat. The concept seems to be that strikes would be initiated and extended forward from this anchor, while blocks would be performed by drawing backward against it.
Huh.
Suggesting a way to focus and direct physical force based on this central 3D GR's orientation.
So it's not just about the weapons themselves, but also about how the wielder interacts with them, almost like a biomechanical interface. Now, shifting gears quite dramatically, our sources also propose that the 3D GR can even function as a form of language. How does that work?
Yeah, this is a truly fascinating and pretty abstract concept. The 3D GR system is presented as a potential language, where the fundamental components, the 6 faces, the 12 edges, their associated colors, numbers, and spatial relationships, and the interactions between these components are all imbued with linguistic and symbolic meaning.
So the shape is the language.
In a sense. Scar, in the context of our sources, views the 3D GR as the very base lexicon upon which an entirely new system of societal communication and understanding could be built.
A base lexicon.
Wow. The direct association of each face with specific actions, movements, or states, for instance, yellow representing lunge strike or purple signifying grounding stabilize, reinforces this idea of a fundamental vocabulary encoded within the 3D GR's structure and attributes.
So it's not just a geometric object, it's a system of meaning, a fundamental alphabet or set of symbols. That's a really profound idea. Now, let's consider how this three-dimensional form relates to the two-dimensional plane. Our sources mention golden rhombus tiling. What's that connection?
Yes, a planar tessellation, or tiling pattern, can be created using 6 golden rhombi with specific interior angles of 120 degrees and 60 degrees.
Same angles as the faces.
Precisely. And with each rhombus having an edge length that matches the edges of the 3D GR, faces that 2.84 unit length, this two-dimensional tiling is geometrically congruent with the faces of the 3D GR, meaning a flattened version of the 3D GR surface could perfectly cover this tile pattern.
Okay.
The golden ratio is also inherent in the ratio of the diagonals within each of these rhombi in the tiling.
Okay, so it's like taking the 3D shape and laying its faces out flat on a surface. What's the point of that, though?
Well, this two-dimensional projection isn't just a mathematical curiosity. It has potential practical applications. It can serve as a fundamental unit cell blueprint for manufacturing processes.
Ah, like for the MIS thing.
Exactly, providing a template for how individual 3D GR units might be arranged. It can also act as a visual representation of graphene layering at the nanoscale, helping to understand the material structure.
I see.
Furthermore, within the AMIS framework, this tiling can even represent a symbolic expression of linguistic tessellation, how the fundamental units of the language might be arranged visually.
Okay.
The colored and numbered faces, along with the angular vectors defined by the rhombi, can also dictate binding orientation in various applications. Even the spacing between these units in the tiling could play a role in how signals propagate through a system.
So this flat representation is multifunctional, acting as a blueprint, a visual aid, and even a guide for interactions at different levels. That's quite integrated. Our sources frequently mention this individual, Scar, as the designer and developer of the 3D GR. What can we infer about their mastery of this whole framework?
Well, the consistent references throughout the sources emphasize Scar's profound understanding and comprehensive application of the 3D GR principles. It seems less like discovery and more like deliberate design.
Right.
We see repeated mentions of the basic properties that Scar has defined: the 8 vertices, 12 equal edges, the 6 number-side color faces with diagonals proportioned according to the Fibonacci sequence, which is closely linked to the golden ratio. The described fabrication steps for the 3D GR battery, the detailed rules governing structural assembly in AMIs, the proposed implementation of signaling networks, and the integration of machine units for artificial citizens. They're all presented as outcomes of this overarching 3D GR framework conceived by Scar.
So Scar really built this whole system conceptually, and it sounds like Scar has even developed a whole system of movement and combat intricately linked to the 3D GR. That seemed incredibly specific.
Indeed. There's a detailed description of synchronic footwork and swordplay based on a very specific 3 beats per bar rhythm.
3 beats per bar.
At a tempo of 48 BPM with 3 clicks per beat. The footwork, involving a heel ball stabilized motion and a lift, is precisely synchronized to these clicks, and each beat corresponds to a distinct swordplay stance.
Heel ball stabilize. Okay.
The various movements, strikes, binds, and blocks are coordinated with specific positioning of the right and left feet, with terms like lock, side, and tide describing these positions.
Lock, side, tide.
The sources even outline concepts of forward time and backward time sequences within this swordplay. We also get descriptions of specific sequences of footwork, such as advance left-right and retreat left-right.
It's like a whole martial art form that's been explicitly encoded using the 3D GR as its foundational principles, almost like dance notation but for combat.
That's one way to think about it, yes.
Yeah.
And what about the specifics of the scathe arrow and the bladed bow in this context? How does that fit?
Right, Weapon System 3, the scathe arrow and the bladed bow. The sources detail how the rotation of the wooden grip, which is linked to the orange 8 and green 9 faces.
The back faces.
Right. And the emergence of the 3D GR pommel from either the thumbs or the base of the palm associated with the blue 3 and red 2 faces, the front faces, directly influence the orientation of the blade. The rotational translations along the X, Y, and Z axes are presented as key to the weapon's dynamic use.
Yeah, so the grip and pommel interaction controls the blade's movement in 3D space.
Seems like it. The bladed bow incorporates a central median 3D GR nook, and the heart 3D GR remains a fixed anchoring point for stability and force application.
The anchor again.
Yep. There's even a list of various end guard stances, each with specific hand positions relative to this median 3D Giardic, with evocative names like pike, viper, stos, and shield.
Pike, Viper. Quite the naming convention.
It's an incredibly detailed and interconnected system that Scar appears to have masterminded, linking geometry, movement, materials, energy, maybe even language in this unique way. And finally, our sources refer to a 3DGR sovereignty execution framework. What's the essence of that concept? Sounds grand.
It does sound quite ambitious. This framework seems to outline a potential strategic approach for establishing the 3DGR as a foundational and influential element, perhaps within a broader system or even a societal structure.
How so?
It begins with defining a sovereign nexus, which acts as a central, unchangeable core identity or principle. Following this is harmonic expansion, where variations and applications that resonate with this core are developed and disseminated.
Okay.
The crystalline threshold describes a process of selective integration, where only those elements that align and harmonize with the core nexus are adopted and reinforced.
Like filtering.
Sort of, yes. This ultimately leads to an immutable lattice, representing a stable, self-sustaining, and resistant framework built upon the principles of the 3DGR.
So it's not just about physical objects or energy, but potentially about establishing a lasting and influential system of thought, organization, or even governance based on the 3DGR principles. That's a lot to unpack.
It certainly takes the concept beyond simple geometry.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all of this. What would you say is the absolute key takeaway from our deep dive into the 3DGR if you had to boil it down?
The fundamental takeaway, I think, is that the three-dimensional golden rhombus is significantly more than just an aesthetically pleasing geometric form. It represents a foundational and remarkably versatile element characterized by its precisely defined geometry and inherent material properties.
Right.
These fundamental characteristics enable a surprisingly extensive range of sophisticated applications, from enabling efficient energy storage and advanced batteries to facilitating the intricate construction of materials through additive manufacturing, providing the basis for complex signaling and computational architectures in theoretical artificial intelligence, informing the design principles of advanced weaponry, and even providing the structure for a unique symbolic language.
Yeah.
All of these seemingly disparate fields are interconnected through the underlying principles of the 3DGR's design. It's the common thread.
It's truly astonishing how this single fundamental geometric structure, imbued with both mathematical elegance through the golden ratio and practical material intelligence through graphene, can potentially manifest in so many diverse and impactful ways. It's kind of mind-bending.
It really is.
So for you, the listener, consider this. How might such a fundamental structure, possessing these inherent properties and this multi-layered potential, continue to reshape various fields in the years to come? What other unexpected applications might yet emerge from this base lexicon of form and function? Think about the profound implications of a design where the very shape and its inherent properties dictate its functionality across so many different domains, and how that might just change the landscape of technology, communication, and maybe even our understanding of fundamental systems. Ever stop to think that the most basic shapes might actually hold the keys to some really advanced tech?
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you're in the right place then, because today we're really diving deep into the three-dimensional golden rhombus, or the 3DGR. Now, I know it sounds maybe a bit sci-fi, and look, in some ways it is cutting-edge stuff.
It definitely pushes boundaries.
But what's kind of blowing my mind is how this very specific shape, rooted in the golden ratio, keeps popping up in such practical, diverse areas based on what we've looked at.
That's surprisingly versatile.
Totally. We're talking energy storage, new manufacturing ideas, information processing, and even, well, some other potentially game-changing fields, even a form of language.
That's right. It touches on a lot.
So our mission today, our deep dive, is to unpack this 3DGR. What is it structurally? What makes it tick? And then explore all these different ways it's being used. What are the core principles? What's the potential here?
And what's really captivating, I think, is how you take a simple rhombus, extend it to 3D, shape it just so with the golden ratio, and suddenly it becomes this foundational piece for, well, a remarkable range of advanced tech. The material we've seen really paints that picture.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's really try to get our heads around the shape itself. What exactly is a three-dimensional golden rhombus?
Okay, so fundamentally, the 3DGR is a solid shape. It's three-dimensional, and it's formed by connecting 6 individual golden rhombi together in a very precise way.
6 diamond shapes, basically.
Kind of, yeah, but specifically golden rhombi. Imagine fitting these 6 faces together in 3D space, creating one unified structure. The key things to picture are its 8 points, or vertices.
Okay.
The 12 edges connecting those points, and all 12 edges are the same length.
Equal edges. Yeah.
And then the 6 faces themselves. And these aren't just any faces. Each one has a specific number, a color, and even a symbolic action or direction tied to it. We can get into those details.
Okay, 6 specific rhombi. Now, you mentioned the golden ratio. We hear that thrown around a lot. Why is it so important here?
The golden ratio, roughly 1.618. It's absolutely crucial, not just for looks, but functionally.
How so?
It dictates the exact proportions within each rhombus face and how they all relate spatially in the 3D GR. It's not just about aesthetics. Mathematically, this ratio contributes to the structure's inherent stability, how forces are distributed harmoniously.
So it helps it hold together better.
Precisely. Think of it like a mathematical sweet spot for structural integrity. And that becomes incredibly important when you're talking about using these at really small scales.
Right, stability matters then. Now, the sources got pretty specific about dimensions. What kind of scale are we actually dealing with?
We're talking tiny. The length of each of those 12 edges is about 2.84 nanometers.
Nanometers, wow.
Yeah, a billionth of a meter. And interestingly, that 2.84 nanometer length, it closely matches the bond length between carbon atoms and graphene.
Graphene, okay, that's a big clue about materials.
Exactly. And the faces, the rhombi, they have a longer diagonal of about 4.59 nanometers and a shorter diagonal matching the edge length, 2.84 nanometers. The angles are fixed too, 120 degrees opposite the long diagonal, 60 degrees opposite the short one.
And those specific angles are why the 6 faces fit together perfectly in 3D.
That's the key. It all slots together just right because of those dimensions and angles.
Nanoscale precision. Okay, let's go back to those faces. You said number side color faces? That sounds really unique.
It is. This is where it gets layered beyond just geometry. Each face isn't just a surface, it's encoded. Color, number, and a symbolic meaning.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, so the top face is yellow, number 1. Associated actions, lunge, strike.
Lunge and strike. Okay.
Front right face.
Yeah.
Red, number 2, signifies rightward and clockwise movement. Front left. Blue, number 3, represents leftward and anti-rotary. The opposite.
Left, anti-rotary. Got it.
Bottom face. Purple, number 7, associated with grounding, foundation, stabilization.
Ah, the base. Makes sense.
Then the back right. Orange, number 8, again rightward, but this time anti-rotary.
Okay, different rotation.
And finally back left.
Yeah.
Green, number 9, leftward and clockwise.
Wow, okay, so it's like each side has a specific job or instruction coded onto it?
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And the whole 3D GR structure, beyond the faces, has interesting properties. It has certain symmetries, parts mirroring others, but also an overall asymmetry because the diagonals aren't equal. And fascinatingly, it's fractal.
Fractal, meaning it repeats itself at smaller scales.
Exactly. One 3D GR can theoretically be subdivided into 27 smaller, self-similar 3D GRs. This could be huge for building complex, scalable networks.
Mind-bending. Okay. Precise shape, coded faces, fractal potential. How do you actually make one? What materials are we talking about besides the graphene hint?
Well, advanced materials are definitely key. The sources really emphasize integrating graphene strategically.
How so? Where does the graphene go?
Specifically, graphene bonds are incorporated right along those 12 edges.
Ah, reinforcing the edges.
Exactly. Graphene is known for its incredible strength, durability, stability, and crucially, electrical conductivity.
Right.
The name itself, three-dimensional graphene rhombus, tells you how important it is.
Graphene, yeah, the wonder material. So it provides the backbone.
Yeah.
What about graphene aerogel? I saw that mentioned too.
Yes, specifically for the 3D GR battery application. In that context, graphene aerogel acts as a high-density electrolyte.
The stuff ions move through in a battery.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Aerogel has this incredibly porous structure, which means ions can zip through it really efficiently. That's vital for high-performance batteries.
Okay, got the shape, got the materials, graphene edges, aerogel electrolyte sometimes. Now, the really exciting part, what can you do with these things? The applications list was pretty expensive. Let's start with energy. This 3D GR battery, how does the shape help?
The specific geometry, the way those 6 golden rhombi fit together, provides a really efficient framework for a battery. Well, combined with the materials, it facilitates energy storage and release. So the battery uses a core, built from this 3D-GR structure. The graphene edges give it strength and conductivity.
Huh?
The aerogel is the fast electrolyte. And then the electrodes, cathode, and anode are integrated right at those 8 vertices.
That's the points.
Yeah, in specific configurations, depending on the battery design. So the shape isn't passive. It actively contributes to how the battery works.
Clever. The form is the function, almost. Okay, what about manufacturing? You mentioned AMI's Additive Manufacturing Information System. How does the 3D-GR play a role there?
It's the fundamental building block in AMIs.
Yeah.
Think of it like nanoscale construction.
Okay.
In this system, 3D-GR units self-assemble into complex structures. They form these neighborhoods, usually a central anchoring 3D-GR, and then additional 3D-GRs around it, sometimes called synchronic swords in this context.
Synchronic swords. Interesting name.
Yeah, and remember those colored and numbered faces.
The coded faces, right?
They act as super specific binding points, like coded connectors. They dictate the exact orientation when these units join up during manufacturing. Ensures accuracy, creates the intended design.
So it's like hyper-advanced molecular Legos where the colors and numbers tell you exactly how they click together.
That's actually a really good analogy, yeah. Complex 3D structures get built iteratively. You attach these additional 3D-GRs to the anchoring one. They can attach inverted, or in other specific ways, all governed by principles based on phi, the golden ratio. This lets you build really intricate, efficient structures, like Fibonacci and lattices.
Based on the Fibonacci sequence.
Right. Or complex fractal architectures, all from these basic 3D-GR units.
That's amazing. From batteries to nano 3D printing. Now, the sources also got into signaling, computation, even artificial citizenry. That sounds pretty far out.
It definitely ventures into some highly advanced concepts, but the principles stem from the 3D-GR structure and how they can interact. For signaling networks, the additional 3D-GRs could resolve binary info. Think nanoscale switches or logic gates.
Little decision makers.
Potentially. The central anchoring 3D-GR processes these inputs, creating signaling pathways across these interconnected neighborhoods. You can build complex, maybe even adaptive information networks.
So they could communicate and compute at a fundamental level.
That's the idea. And the machine units for artificial citizens. That's a conceptual architecture built on the 3D-GR.
Layered, you said.
Yeah. A central radiation core, a 3D-GR surrounded by 26 others, emitting computation. An interactive body, a fractal 3D-GR network for parallel processing, and 54 dendritic arms acting as signal receivers for communication between units.
Whoa.
The vision is modular, fractal artificial citizens. Energy, structure, computation, all integrated at this 3D-GR level.
Incredible. From tiny shapes to complex, self-contained systems. Now, the sources also went into, let's say, applied uses, weaponry. How does the 3D-GR fit in there?
Well, within the framework presented, attributed largely to this individual, SCAR.
A SCAR, right?
The 3D-GR appears as a core element in various weapon designs. There are synchronic swords, for instance, named Tempo and Rhythm, mirrored weapons based on the 3D-GR structure. They supposedly incorporate those 6 face attributes, suggesting the colors and numbers influence function.
How they're used.
Perhaps. Then there's Scathe, a blade with a 3D-GR pommel grip, using 5 face color attributes, maybe for different grips or functions. Even a bladed bow is mentioned. It has a central 3D-GR nook and a string made of refined 3D-GR units.
So the shape is baked right into the design and function. What about the anchoring 3D-GR heart? That sounded specific.
Yes, described as a 3D-GR bound to the chest, linked to the purple 7 bottom face.
The grounding face.
Right. It's presented as a fixed point for kinetic interaction in combat. Strikes extend forward from it, blocks pull backward against it, a way to focus and direct force using the central anchor.
Like a biomechanical interface. Wow. Okay, shifting gears completely now. Language. The sources say the 3D-GR can act as a language.
This is a really abstract but fascinating concept. The idea is the whole 3D-GR system, faces, edges, colors, numbers, relationships, interactions, becomes a language.
The components themselves are words or symbols.
Essentially, yes. SCAR, in the sources, views the 3D-GR as the base lexicon, a foundation for potentially recoding societal communication.
A whole new language.
That seems to be the implication. The direct link between faces and actions, yellow for lunge strike, purple for grounding stabilize, reinforces this idea of a vocabulary built into the shape itself.
So it's not just an object, it's a system of meaning, a fundamental alphabet. That's profound.
Okay, let's connect this 3D shape back to 2D, golden rhombus tiling.
Right. You can create a flat pattern, a tessellation, using 6 golden rhombi. They need specific angles, 120 and 60 degrees, and the edge length matching the 3D-GR face is 2.84 units.
And this flat pattern matches the 3D-GR surface unfolded.
Exactly. It's congruent. A flattened version of the 3D-GR surface fits perfectly onto this tiling. And the golden ratio is there too, in the diagonals of the flat rhombi. Okay, so like laying the 3D shapes faces flat, what's the use of that?
It's not just math. It has potential uses.
Mm.
It can be a blueprint, a unit cell template for manufacturing,
Yeah.
how to arrange the 3D-GR unit.
It's a guide.
Yeah. Or a visual aid for graphene layering at the nanoscale. And in AMIS, it can even symbolize linguistic tessellation, how the language units fit together. The colors, numbers, angles define binding orientation in different applications. Even the spacing might affect signal propagation.
So the flat version is also multifunctional. Blueprint, visual aid, interaction guide. Now this scar figure comes up constantly as the designer and developer. What does that tell us about their grasp of this system?
The sources consistently point to SCAR having a really deep, comprehensive understanding and application of all these 3D-GR principles.
It seems that way.
You see the repetition of the basic SCAR defined. 8 vertices, 12 equal edges, the 6 number-side color faces with Fibonacci proportion diagonals, the detailed steps for the 3D-GR battery, the rules for AMIS assembly, the signaling network ideas, the machine unit integration for artificial citizens. It's all presented as flowing from SCAR's 3D-GR framework.
And it sounds like SCAR even developed a whole movement system tied to it. Combat, footwork.
Oh yeah, very detailed descriptions. Synchronic footwork and swordplay. Based on a specific rhythm, 3 beats per bar, 48 BPM, 3 clicks per beat.
Super precise.
The footwork heel ball stabilized lift is synced to those clicks. Each beat is a swordplay stance. Movements like strikes, binds, blocks are coordinated with specific foot positions, lock, side, tide.
Names for foot positions.
Yes. And concepts like forward time and backward time sequences in the swordplay. Specific footwork sequences too. Advanced left-right, retreat left-right.
It's like a complete martial art encoded with the 3D-GR. What about the scathe arrow and the bladed bow specific?
All right, Weapon System 3. Sources detail how rotating the wooden grip linked to orange 8 and green 9 faces, and how the 3D-GR pommel emerges from thumbs or palm base, linked to blue 3 and red 2, directly affects the blade's orientation. Rotational translations, X, Y, Z axes are key. Yeah. The bladed bow has that median 3D-GR nook, and the heart 3D-GR is the fixed anchor.
And stances too.
A whole list of vanguard stances, specific hand positions relative to that median 3D-GR nook. Names like pike, viper, estos, shield.
It's an incredibly intricate, interconnected system SCAR seems to have designed, linking geometry, movement, weapons, even language. Finally, what was that 3D-GR sovereignty execution framework? What's the gist?
It sounds like a strategic approach. How to establish the 3D-GR as a foundational, maybe even controlling element in a larger system.
How?
It starts with the sovereign nexus, a core unchanging principle, then harmonic expansion, developing applications that resonate with that core, then a crystalline threshold, selectively integrating only things that align and harmonize.
Filtering.
Sort of, leading ultimately to an immutable lattice, a stable, self-sustaining, resistant framework built on these 3D-GR principles.
So not just physical stuff, but potentially establishing a whole system of thought, organization, maybe even governance, based on the 3D-GR. Wow. Okay, let's try to pull this all together. What's the absolute key takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the fundamental point is that the 3D-GR is way more than just a pretty shape. It's a foundational, incredibly versatile element. Its power comes from its precise geometry and its inherent material properties.
Right.
And those characteristics enable this huge range of really sophisticated applications, from energy storage to nanomanufacturing to theoretical AI architectures, weapon design principles, even symbolic language.
All connected.
All interconnected through the underlying design principles of this one shape. It's quite remarkable.
It really is astonishing how this single structure, with math like the golden ratio and materials like graphene built in, could manifest in so many different, impactful ways. So for you listening, here's something to chew on. How might a fundamental structure like this, with all this built-in potential, keep reshaping different fields? What other, maybe unexpected applications could emerge from this kind of base lexicon of form and function? Think about the implications when the very shape itself dictates function across so many areas. How might that change? Well, maybe everything. Ever stop to think that the most, fundamental shapes might hold the secrets to some seriously advanced technology? Okay, you're definitely in the right place then, because today we're plunging into the fascinating world of the three-dimensional golden rhombus, or the 3DGR for short.
Right.
Now, I know that sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, and honestly, in a way, it is pretty cutting-edge stuff.
It really is.
But what's really blowing my mind is how this very specific geometric form, rooted in the elegant golden ratio, pops up in the most surprisingly practical and, well, diverse applications based on what we've been looking at.
Yeah, the range is quite something.
We're talking energy storage, revolutionary manufacturing techniques, maybe even how information could be processed, and, well, let's just say some potentially game-changing applications in other fields, too, even a kind of language. So our mission on this deep dive, really, is to unpack the core of this 3DGR, what makes it tick structurally, and then explore the incredibly varied ways it's being used. What are the fundamental principles and what's the potential here?
And what's truly captivating, I think, is how taking a basic shape like a rhombus, pushing it into 3D, and then shaping it precisely with the golden ratio,
Right.
well, it transforms into this foundational piece for just a remarkable range of advanced tech.
Right.
The material we've looked through really paints a picture of something incredibly versatile, fundamentally versatile.
Absolutely. So let's really get our heads around this shape. What exactly are we talking about when we say three-dimensional golden rhombus?
Okay, so essentially the 3DGR is a three-dimensional solid. It's formed by connecting 6 individual golden rhombi, but in a very precise way.
6 diamond shapes, basically.
Kinda, yeah. Imagine taking 6 of those diamond-shaped faces and fitting them perfectly together in 3D space. It creates this single, unified form.
Okay.
And the key things to grasp are its 8 points, the vertices,
Right.
12 equal lines or edges that connect these points, and then the 6 faces themselves. And these aren't just any faces. They each have a specific number, a color, and even an associated symbolic action or direction. We'll definitely get more into those attributes.
Okay, 6 rhombi coming together, a specific way. Now, you mentioned the golden ratio. We hear that term a lot. Why is it so crucial here for this structure?
The golden ratio, roughly 1.618,
Yeah.
right? It's absolutely fundamental, not just for how it looks, but functionally.
Functionally, how so?
It dictates the precise proportions within each of those 6 rhombic faces, and also the spatial relationships between them in the final 3DGR structure.
Okay.
And this specific ratio, it's not just about looking nice. Mathematically, it contributes to the structure's inherent stability, how forces are distributed harmoniously within it.
Ah, okay.
Think of it like a kind of mathematical sweet spot for structural integrity, which becomes super important when you think about using these things at really, really small scales.
So it's not just a pretty number. It actually affects how the shape holds together, how it behaves.
Got it. Now, the details we saw get pretty granular, dimensions and stuff. What kind of scale are we talking?
Oh, yeah, very granular. The length of each of those 12 equal edges, it's approximately 2.84 nanometers.
The nanometers. Okay, wait. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter.
Exactly. Incredibly tiny. And what's interesting is that this length, 2.84 millimeter, it closely matches the typical bond length between carbon atoms in graphene.
Ah, okay. A hint about the materials, maybe?
Yeah, precisely. It points towards the materials involved. And then the faces, the rhombic faces, each one has a longer diagonal of about 4.59 nanometers and a shorter one of 2.84 nanometers.
Right. The same as the edge lengths for the shorter one.
Correct. And the angles within these faces are also exact. 120 degrees opposite the long diagonal and 60 degrees opposite the short one.
Okay.
These specific angles are critical for how those 6 rhombis fit together perfectly in 3D to make the 3DGR. Nanometers. So we're operating almost at an atomic level for some of this stuff. Okay, now let's talk about these number side color faces. That sounds really unique.
All right. This is where the 3DGR gets, let's say, another layer of complexity and potential functionality beyond just its shape.
How so?
Each of the 6 faces isn't just a flat surface. It's basically encoded with specific info. A color, a number, and a symbolic action or direction tied to it.
Like codes on each side.
Yeah.
Examples.
Yeah. So the top face, for instance, it's yellow, carries the number 1, and it's linked to the actions lunge and strike.
Okay, lunge strike.
Then the front right face. Red, number 2, signifies movement rightward and clockwise.
Wayward clockwise, okay.
Opposite that, on the front left, you've got the blue face, number 3, representing leftward and anti-rotary movement.
Leftward, anti-rotary. Different rotation.
Exactly. Then there's the bottom face, that's purple, number 7, and it's associated with grounding, foundation, stabilization.
Ah, the base. Makes sense.
Then the back right face is orange, number 8, again indicating rightward movement, but this time anti-rotary.
Okay, another rightward but opposite rotation to the front.
Correct. And finally, the back left face is green, number 9, associated with leftward and clockwise motion.
Wow. Okay. So it's like each side has a built-in instruction or a specific job to do in a bigger system.
That's a great way to put it.
Hmm.
And the 3D GR isn't just about these coded faces.
Hmm.
The whole structure, it has certain symmetries, parts are mirror images, but it also has an inherent asymmetry because of the different diagonal lengths in the rhombi.
Right. Not perfectly symmetrical then.
No. And maybe most fascinatingly, it has this fractal characteristic,
Fractal.
meaning
Huh.
a single 3D GR can, theoretically, be subdivided into 27 smaller, self-similar 3D GRs.
Wow. Like Russian dolls, but with rhombuses.
Kind of. And this self-similarity, repeating at different scales, could be hugely significant for how these structures interact, how they build complex systems. It allows for scalability, maybe intricate networks.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly precise geometric shape, coded faces, fractal potential. How are these things actually made? What materials bring a 3D GR to life?
Yeah, the materials are absolutely key to making the 3D GR actually work for these applications. Our sources really hammer home the strategic integration of graphene.
Graphene, of course, the wonder material.
Pretty much. Graphene bonds are specifically put along the 12 edges of the 3D GR.
Why the edges?
Well, graphene is known for its incredible strength, right? Durability, stability, and also its amazing electrical conductivity.
Right, conducts electricity really well.
So putting it on the edges gives the structure all those benefits. In fact, the name itself, three-dimensional graphene rhombus, highlights how crucial it is.
Makes sense. And I also saw something about graphene aerogel. Where does that fit?
Yes, graphene aerogel comes up in specific applications, especially the 3D GR battery. It acts as a high-density electrolyte.
Electrolyte. That's the stuff ions move through in a battery.
Exactly. Think of it as the medium for ion transport between the electrodes. Graphene aerogel has this unique, super porous structure, which allows ions to move through it really quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
That's critical for high-performance batteries.
Okay, got it. Shape, materials. Now the really exciting part. What can you actually do with a 3D GR? Our sources listed a pretty mind-boggling range. Let's start with energy. This 3D GR battery sounds intriguing. How does this shape help make a better battery?
Well, the specific geometry of the 3D GR shape itself provides a kind of ideal framework for a new way of thinking about battery tech.
How so?
The precise arrangement of those 6 golden rhombi, combined with the properties of the graphene and aerogel, it facilitates really efficient energy storage and release.
Okay.
So basically, a 3D GR battery uses a core built from this structure. The graphene bonds give it structure and conductivity.
Right.
The graphene aerogel is the fast electrolyte, and then the positive and negative electrodes, the cathode and anode, they're integrated right at the 8 vertices.
That point.
Yeah, in specific spots tailored to how the battery needs to work. So the shape isn't just a container, it's actively part of the battery's function.
So the geometry itself optimizes the battery's performance. That's clever.
Okay.
Okay, what's next? Additive manufacturing. AMIs. How does the 3D GR fit there?
Right. AMIS, the Additive Manufacturing Information System. The 3D GR acts as the fundamental building block in this system.
Like a tiny brick.
Sort of, but much more complex. Imagine a nanoscale construction system where these 3D GR units can basically self-assemble into complex structures.
Okay.
Within AMIS, they organize into neighborhoods. Usually there's a central anchoring 3D GR.
An anchor point.
Exactly. And around it are additional 3D GRs. Sometimes these are called synchronic swords in this context, acting as more building elements.
Synchronic swords. Interesting name.
It is. And remember those colored and numbered faces?
Yeah, the coded ones.
They act as highly specific binding points, like coded connectors. They dictate the exact geometric orientation when these 3D GR units join up during manufacturing. It ensures accuracy, making sure the intended design forms correctly.
So it's like a super advanced molecular level Lego system where the faces tell you exactly how the pieces lock together.
That's a really good analogy, actually. Complex 3D structures get built up iteratively. You attach these additional 3D GRs to the anchoring one, and the attachment can be in different ways inverted or other specific orientations, all governed by principles based on phi, the golden ratio.
High-based rule.
Yeah, and this allows for creating incredibly intricate, efficient structures. Things like Fibonacci and lattices patterns based on the Fibonacci sequence, or even fractal architectures, all built up from these fundamental 3D GR units.
That's mind-boggling, from batteries to essentially 3D printing materials at the nanoscale. Now, our sources also mention signaling, computation, even artificial citizenry. That sounds pretty far out.
It definitely pushes into very advanced concepts, yeah. But the underlying principles still tie back to the 3D GR's unique structure and how it can interact.
So how does it work for signaling?
Well, in the context of signaling networks, those additional 3D GRs could be used to resolve binary information. Think of them acting like nanoscale switches or logic gates.
Okay, like tiny computer components?
Sort of.
Yeah.
And the central anchoring 3D GR could then process these inputs, generating signaling pathways that spread across these interconnected 3D GR neighborhoods. You could create complex, maybe even adaptive, information processing networks.
So they could essentially communicate and make decisions at a really basic level.
That's the idea. And when we get to the machine units for artificial citizens, well, that's a conceptual layered architecture built around the 3D GR framework.
Layered how?
There's talk of a central radiation core, maybe a 3D GR, surrounded by 26 others emitting computational output.
Okay.
This core is linked to an interactive body, described as a fractal network of 3D GRs for parallel processing.
Parallel processing.
Wow. And then an array of 54 dendritic arms, acting as signal receivers for communication between these units.
So the vision is, what? Modular AI beings?
Essentially, yeah. Modular, fractal-based artificial citizens, where their energy, structure, and computation are all intrinsically linked at this fundamental 3D GR level.
That's incredible. From the tiny scale to potentially complex, self-sustaining systems, all from this one shape. Now, the sources also got into some, let's call them applied applications, weaponry. What's the 3D GR's role there?
Right. Within the framework presented, especially the stuff attributed to this individual named Scar, the 3D GR shows up as a foundational element in various weapon designs.
Like how?
Well, there are descriptions of synchronic swords called tempo and rhythm. These are presented as mirrored weapons based on the 3D GR structure.
That's go.
And they're said to incorporate the 6 face attributes, the colors and numbers, suggesting those attributes might influence how they work or how you handle them.
Interesting. What else?
There's another thing called Scathe, described as a blade with a 3D GR pommel grip that uses 5 of the face color attributes. Maybe different grips or functions linked to the colors?
A coated grip, perhaps?
Possibly. And even a bladed bow is mentioned. It apparently incorporates a central 3D GR nook and a string made of refined 3D GR units.
Wow, even the bowstring. Okay, so it sounds like the shape isn't just passive, it's actively built into the design, maybe the function of these weapons. But what about the anchoring 3D GR heart? That sounds specific.
Yeah, very specific. This is described as a 3D GR unit that's meant to be bound to the chest, specifically linked to the purple 7 bottom face position.
Bound to the chest. Where?
It's presented as a fixed point for kinetic interaction during combat. The idea seems to be that strikes originate, extend forward from this anchor, while blocks are performed by drawing backward against it. It suggests a way to focus and direct physical force using this central 3D GR's position.
So it's not just the weapons, but how the user interacts with them, almost like a biomechanical interface. Huh. Okay, shifting gears pretty dramatically now. The sources also suggested the 3D GR could function as a form of language. How on earth does that work?
It's a truly fascinating, quite abstract concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
The 3D GR system is presented as a potential language where the fundamental bits, the faces, edges, colors, numbers, their spatial relationships, and the interactions between them are all loaded with linguistic and symbolic meaning.
So the shape itself is the meaning.
In a way, Scar, in the context of these sources, apparently views the 3D GR as the base lexicon, like the fundamental vocabulary for potentially recoding society's communication.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Extremely. And the direct link between each face and specific actions or states, yellow for lunge strike, purple for grounding stabilize, that reinforces this idea of a fundamental vocabulary encoded right into the 3D GR structure.
So it's not just a geometric object, it's a system of meaning, a fundamental alphabet or symbol set that's really profound. Okay, let's connect this 3D form back to 2D. The sources mentioned golden rhombus tiling.
Yes, exactly. You can create a planar tessellation, a flat tiling pattern, using 6 golden rhombi. They need specific angles, 120 and 60 degrees, and the edge length has to match the 3D GR faces, that 2.84 unit length.
Okay.
And this 2D tiling pattern is geometrically congruent with the faces of the 3D GR, meaning if you could flatten out the 3D GR surface, it would perfectly cover this pattern.
Like unfolding the 3D shape onto a flat surface?
Precisely. And the
Okay.
golden ratio is right there, and the diagonal ratios of the rhombi and the tiling, too.
Okay, so it's like a 2D blueprint of the 3D shape's surface. Is that just a math thing, or does it have uses?
Oh, it definitely has potential practical applications according to the sources.
Here.
It can serve as a fundamental unit cell blueprint for manufacturing,
Right.
a template for arranging individual 3D GR units.
Right, like a guide.
Yeah. Or it could be a visual aid for understanding graphene layering at the nanoscale. And within that AMI's framework, this tiling could even represent a symbolic expression of linguistic tessellation, how the basic units of the language fit together.
Language tiling, interesting.
And the colored numbered faces, the angles, they can dictate binding orientation in different applications too. Even the spacing in the tiling might affect signal propagation.
So this flat version is multifunctional. Blueprint, visual aid, maybe even a guide for interactions. Okay, now these sources consistently mention this individual, Scar, as the designer and developer. What can we infer about their grasp of this whole framework? It seems incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah, the references really emphasize Scar's deep understanding and, well, comprehensive application of these 3D-GR principles.
Right.
We see the basic properties repeated: 8 vertices, 12 edges, the 6 number-side color faces, the Fibonacci golden ratio diagonals, all defined by Scar, and the described steps for making the 3D-GR battery, the detailed rules for AMS assembly, the signaling network ideas, the machine unit integration for artificial citizens. They're all presented as flowing from this overarching 3D-GR framework Scar conceived.
And it sounds like Scar even developed a whole system of movement and combat tied directly to the 3D-GR. That seems incredibly detailed.
It really does. There's a description of synchronic footwork and swordplay based on a very specific rhythm. 3 beats per bar, 48 BPM tempo, 3 clicks per beat.
All clicks per beat.
Yeah, and the footwork heel ball stabilized and then lift is precisely synced to these clicks. Each beat corresponds to a specific swordplay stance.
Okay.
And the movements, strikes, binds, blocks are coordinated with specific foot positions, right and left foot. They use terms like lock, side, tied.
Like dance notation almost.
Very structured. The sources even talk about forward time and backward time sequences in the swordplay, and specific footwork sequences like advance left-right, retreat left-right.
It's like a complete martial art form encoded using the 3D-GR as its foundation.
Wild. And what about the specifics of that scathe arrow and the bladed bow? How do they fit into Scar's system?
Okay, so under Weapon System 3 for the scathe arrow and bladed bow, the sources detail how rotating the wooden grip, which is linked to the orange 8 and green 9 faces.
Right, the back face.
And how the 3D-GR pommel emerges, either from the thumbs or the palm base, tied to blue 3 and red 2.
The front faces.
How those actions directly affect the blade's orientation. It mentions rotational translations XYZ axes as key to using the weapon dynamically.
So grip and hand position translate to blade movement via the 3D-GR faces.
That seems to be the idea. The bladed bow has a central median 3D-GR nook, and that heart 3D-GR anchor stays fixed for stability and force.
Okay.
And there's even a list of different endguard stances, each with specific hand positions relative to that median 3D-GR nook. Names like pike, viper, estos, shield. It's an incredibly detailed, interconnected system Scar seems to have built, linking geometry, movement, weapons, maybe even language. Okay, one last thing mentioned was a 3D-GR sovereignty execution framework. What's the gist of that?
Yeah, that sounds quite strategic. It seems to outline a potential approach for establishing the 3D-GR as foundational, maybe influential, within a larger system, maybe even a society.
How would that work?
It starts with defining a sovereign nexus, a central core identity or principle that doesn't change.
Oh, okay, a core idea.
Then comes harmonic expansion. That's where variations and applications that resonate with the core are developed and spread.
Spreading the idea.
Then the crystalline threshold. This sounds like a process of selective integration. Only things that align and harmonize with that core nexus get adopted and reinforced.
Filtering and strengthening.
Exactly. And this leads ultimately to an immutable lattice, which represents a stable, self-sustaining, maybe resistant framework built entirely on these 3D-GR principles.
So it's not just about physical stuff or energy. It could be about setting up a whole system of thought, organization, maybe even governance based on the 3D-GR.
Wow. Okay, let's try and pull this all together. What's the absolute key takeaway from this deep dive into the 3D-GR?
I think the fundamental takeaway has to be that the three-dimensional golden rhombus is way more than just a pretty geometric shape.
Right.
It represents a foundational and just remarkably versatile element. It's defined by its precise geometry and its inherent material properties. And these fundamental characteristics enable this surprisingly huge range of sophisticated applications.
Mm-hmm.
From efficient energy storage and batteries
Yeah.
to intricate construction via additive manufacturing, the basis for complex signaling and AI concepts, informing weapon design,
Yeah.
even providing a structure for symbolic language.
It connects all these seemingly separate fields.
Exactly. They're all interconnected through the underlying design principles of the 3D-GR itself. It's truly astonishing, isn't it, how this single fundamental shape, loaded with mathematical elegance from the golden ratio and practical material intelligence via graphene, how it can potentially show up in so many diverse and impactful ways.
It really is.
So for you, the listener, maybe consider this. How might such a fundamental structure with these inherent properties and this multi-layered potential, how might it continue to reshape various fields going forward? What other unexpected applications might still emerge from this base lexicon of form and function?
Mm-hmm.
Think about the implications, the really profound implications of a design where the very shape dictates function across so many different domains, and how that might just change the landscape of tech, communication, maybe even our understanding of fundamental systems entirely.
Ever stop to think that maybe the most fundamental shapes could hold secrets to some really advanced tech?
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it?
Well, if you have, you're definitely in the right place today. We're about to plunge into the pretty amazing world of the three-dimensional golden rhombus, the 3D-GR.
Right.
Now, I know that sounds maybe a bit like sci-fi, and, well, in some ways it is cutting edge.
It really is.
But what's kind of blowing my mind is how this specific geometric form, rooted in the golden ratio.
Which is elegant in itself.
Exactly. How it pops up in such practical and honestly diverse applications based on what we've been reading.
It's surprisingly versatile.
We're talking things like new energy storage, revolutionary manufacturing techniques, even ideas about information processing, and let's just say some potentially game-changing stuff in other fields too, even a kind of language.
The breadth is quite remarkable.
So our mission, you could say, for this deep dive is to unpack the core of this 3D-GR. What makes it tick structurally, and then explore these incredibly varied ways it's being used.
Yeah.
What are the underlying principles? What's the potential here?
And what's really captivating, I think, is how taking a basic shape, a rhombus, pushing it into 3D,
Right.
and then shaping it precisely with the golden ratio transforms it. It becomes this foundational piece for a whole range of technologies.
It really seems like it. The material we looked at paints this picture of something fundamental but incredibly flexible.
Exactly. Versatile at its core.
Okay, so let's really try and, get our heads around this shape itself. What exactly are we talking about with a three-dimensional golden rhombus?
Okay, so essentially the 3D-GR is a solid shape, a three-dimensional solid.
Right.
And it's formed by connecting 6 individual golden rhombi, but in a very specific way.
6 diamond shapes, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Imagine taking 6 of those faces and fitting them perfectly together in 3D space. That makes one unified form.
Okay.
And the key features to grasp are its 8 points, or vertices.
Okay, 8 corners.
12 edges connecting those points, and they're all equal in length.
12 equal edges. Got it.
And then the 6 faces themselves. But they aren't just flat sides.
No.
No, each one has a specific number, a specific color, and even an associated symbolic action or direction.
Whoa. Okay. We'll definitely need to circle back to that. That sounds important.
It is. We'll dig into those attributes.
So 6 rhombi fitting together. Now, you mentioned the golden ratio. We hear that term thrown around a lot. Why is it so crucial here?
The golden ratio. Roughly 1.618. It's absolutely fundamental. And not just because it looks nice.
Functionally important.
Exactly. Functionally. It dictates the precise proportions within each rhombus face, and also how they relate spatially in the 3D structure.
So it governs the whole shape.
It does. And this specific ratio, it isn't just about aesthetics. Mathematically, it contributes to the structure's inherent stability.
Stability.
And the harmonious distribution of forces within it. Think of it as like a mathematical sweet spot for structural integrity.
Right, like nature uses it sometimes.
Precisely. And that becomes incredibly important when you consider using these things at really, really small scales.
So not just a pretty number. It actually affects how the shape holds up and behaves.
Absolutely.
Now, the details we saw, they get pretty granular on dimensions. What kind of scale are we talking about? Is this big? Small?
Very small. The length of each of those 12 equal edges, it's about 2.84 nanometers.
Nanometers. Okay, remind me. That's tiny, right?
It's incredibly tiny, a billionth of a meter.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that length, 2.84 nanometers, it closely matches the typical bond length between carbon atoms in graphene.
Ah, graphene. Okay. That's a clue about the materials, maybe.
Exactly. It hints at what's involved.
An acronym.
And then the faces, the rhombic faces, each one has a longer diagonal, about 4.59 nanometers,
Okay.
and a shorter diagonal of 2.84 nanometers, same as the edge length.
Got it. Different diagonals.
Right. And the angles within those faces are also precise. You have 120 degrees opposite the longer diagonal and 60 degrees opposite the shorter one. These specific angles are critical. They're why the 6 rhombi fit together perfectly in 3D to make the 3D GR.
So everything is super precise down to the nanometer scale. We're definitely operating almost at the atomic level for some uses.
That's the picture painted, yes.
Now, let's get back to those number side color faces. That sounds really unique.
It is. This is where the 3D GR gets layers of complexity and, potential functionality beyond just its shape.
Okay.
Each of the 6 faces isn't just a surface. It's encoded with information.
Encoded how?
With a specific color, a number, and a symbolic action or direction linked to it.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The top face, it's yellow, number 1, and it's linked to the actions lunge and strike.
Lunge and strike. Okay. What about another one?
The front right face is red, number 2. It signifies movement rightward and clockwise.
Rightward clockwise. Makes sense.
Then opposite that, on the front left, you've got the blue face, number 3, that represents leftward and anti-rotary movement.
Leftward, anti-rotary. Okay.
Then there's the bottom face. That one's purple, number 7. It's associated with grounding, foundation, stabilization.
Purple 7 for grounding. I like that.
Then the back right face is orange, number 8. Also rightward movement, but this time anti-rotary.
Okay, another rightward, but different rotation.
And finally, the back left face is green, number 9. That's leftward and clockwise motion.
Wow. So it's like each side has a built-in instruction or a specific job within a bigger system.
That's a good way to put it, exactly. And the 3D GR isn't just about these coded faces either.
There's more.
Well, the overall structure has certain symmetries, parts are mirror images of others.
Yeah.
But it also has an inherent asymmetry because the diagonals in the rhombic faces aren't the same length.
Right, the long and short ones.
And maybe most fascinating, it has this fractal quality.
Fractal, like repeating patterns.
Yes. A single 3D GR can, theoretically, be subdivided into 27 smaller, self-similar 3D GRs.
27. Inside one.
That's the idea. The self-similarity across scales could be huge for how these things interact and build complex systems. Think scalability, intricate networks.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly precise geometric shape, these unique, almost coded faces, and it's fractal. How are they actually built? What materials are used?
Right, the materials. They're absolutely key to making the 3D GR work in practice. The sources really emphasize integrating advanced materials.
Like the graphene you mentioned.
Exactly. Graphene is central. Specifically, graphene bonds are incorporated right along the 12 edges of the 3D GR.
Why graphene?
Well, graphene is famous for being incredibly strong, durable, stable, and it's a fantastic electrical conductor.
Okay, all good things for a building block.
Absolutely vital. In fact, the name itself, three-dimensional graphene rhombus, highlights how crucial it is.
Gotcha. So the graphene provides the strength and conductivity along the edges. Now, I also saw something about graphene aerogel.
Yes, that comes up too. In certain applications, especially the 3D GR battery we'll talk about, graphene aerogel is used as a high-density electrolyte.
Electrolyte, like in a regular battery.
Exactly. It's the stuff that lets ions move between the positive and negative parts. Graphene aerogel has this unique, super porous structure, which allows ions to move through it really quickly and efficiently. That's crucial for a high-performance battery.
Okay, so we have the shape, the materials, graphene edges, maybe aerogel inside. Now, for the really exciting bit, what can you actually do with a 3D GR? The sources listed a mind-boggling range. Let's start with energy. This 3D GR battery sounds cool.
It does. The idea is that the specific geometry of the 3D GR provides this ideal framework for a new kind of battery tech.
How so?
Well, the precise arrangement of those 6 golden rhombi, plus the material properties we just discussed, it all helps with storing and releasing energy efficiently.
So the shape itself helps.
Yes. In
Okay.
essence, a 3D-GR battery uses a core built from this structure. The graphene bonds give it integrity and conductivity.
Right.
The graphene aerogel is the fast electrolyte. And the electrodes, the cathode and anode, are integrated right at those 8 vertices, those corners.
Ah, so the points become the terminals, sort of.
In specific configurations, yes, tailored to the battery design. So the shape isn't just passive, it actively helps the battery function.
That is clever, using the geometry itself.
Yeah.
Okay, energy storage. What's next? Additive manufacturing, you mentioned AMS.
Right, the Additive Manufacturing Information System, or AMS. Here, the 3D-GR acts as the fundamental building block.
Like a tiny Lego brick.
Kind of, but way more advanced. Imagine a nanoscale construction system where these 3D-GR units can self-assemble into complex structures.
Self-assemble. Wow.
Within AMS, they form these groups called neighborhoods. Typically, there's a central anchoring 3D-GR,
A main one.
and then additional 3D-GRs around it. Sometimes these are called synchronic swords in this context, acting as more building elements.
Synchronic swords. Interesting name.
And remember those colored and numbered faces?
Yeah, the coded ones.
They act as super-specific binding points, like coded connectors. They dictate the exact geometric orientation when these units join up.
So they ensure everything lines up perfectly during manufacturing.
Precisely. Accuracy is key. They guide the formation of the intended designs.
So it really is like molecular Legos, where the faces tell you exactly how they click together.
That's a really apt analogy, actually. And complex 3D structures get built up iteratively. You attach these additional 3D GRs to the anchoring one.
Ow!
They can attach in inverted ways or other specific orientations, all governed by principles based on phi, the golden ratio.
Okay.
And this allows for creating incredibly intricate structures, things like Fibonaccian lattices.
Based on the Fibonacci sequence.
Yes, or fractal architectures, all built up from these basic 3D GR units.
That is seriously mind-boggling, from batteries to, like, 3D printing materials at the nanoscale. Now, the sources also mentions signaling, computation, even artificial citizenry. That sounds pretty far out.
It definitely pushes into advanced concepts, yeah. But the principles still seem rooted in the 3D GR's unique structure and how it interacts.
So how does it work for signaling?
Well, in signaling networks, the idea is that the additional 3D GRs could resolve binary information. Think of them acting like nanoscale switches,
Little logic gates.
potentially. And the central anchoring 3D GR would then process these inputs, creating signaling pathways that can spread across these interconnected neighborhoods.
Creating complex information networks.
That seems to be the idea, potentially adaptive ones, too.
So they could, like, communicate and make basic decisions.
At a fundamental level, perhaps. And when you get to the machine units for artificial citizens,
Yeah, that part.
we're looking at a conceptual layered architecture built around the 3D GR.
Layers.
There's a central radiation core envisioned as one 3D GR surrounded by 26 others emitting some computational output,
Okay, a processing core.
integrated with an interactant body described as a fractal 3D GR network for parallel processing,
A body made of these things.
and an array of 54 dendritic arms, acting as signal receivers for communication between units.
54 arms. Wow.
So the overall vision is a modular, fractal-based artificial citizens. Their energy, structure, computation, all linked at this fundamental 3D GR level.
That's incredible. From the nanoscale up to potentially complex, self-contained systems, all from this one shape. Now, the sources also got into some, let's call them applied uses, in weaponry.
Yes, that was another area covered.
What role does the 3D GR play there?
Within the framework presented, especially the stuff attributed to this individual, SCAR,
Right, Scott.
the 3D GR shows up as a foundational element in various weapon designs.
Like what?
For instance, descriptions of synchronous swords. They're named Tempo and Rhythm, presented as mirrored weapons based on the 3D GR structure.
Mirrored 3D GR swords.
And they supposedly incorporate those 6 face attributes, color, number, suggesting maybe those attributes affect how they work or are handled.
Interesting. Any others?
There's Scathe,
Right.
described as a blade with a 3D GR pommel grip. It uses 5 of the face color attributes,
A 3D GR pommel grip. Linked to colors.
maybe indicating different grips or functions tied to those colors. And even a bladed bow is mentioned.
A bow.
Yeah, with a central 3D GR nook and a string made of refined 3D GR units.
A string made of 3D GRs. Okay, so the shape isn't just sitting there. It's actively part of the design and function.
That's how it's presented, yes.
But there was also this anchoring 3D GR heart. That sounds very specific. Binding it to the chest.
Yes. described as a 3D GR unit meant to be bound to the chest, specifically linked to the purple 7 bottom face location.
A grounding face.
Exactly. And this anchored 3D GR is presented as a fixed point for kinetic interaction, for combat.
How would that work?
The concept seems to be that strikes initiate forward from this anchor point, while blocks involve drawing backward against it.
So it focuses and directs force.
Suggests a way to do that, yeah, based on the central 3D GR's orientation.
So it's not just the weapons, but how the person interacts with them, almost like a biomechanical interface.
It leans in that direction, conceptually.
Okay, now shifting gears pretty dramatically, the sources also suggest that 3D GR can act as a form of language. How on earth does that work?
This is maybe the most abstract but also fascinating concept. The 3D GR system is presented as a potential language.
A language based on a shape.
Where the fundamental parts, the faces, edges, colors, numbers, spatial relationships, and the interactions between them are all imbued with linguistic symbolic meaning.
So the parts mean things.
That's the idea. SCAR, in the context of these sources, apparently views the 3D GR as the base lexicon.
The basic vocabulary.
For potentially recoding societal communication, even understanding.
That's ambitious.
It is, but the direct link of each face to specific actions or states, yellow for lunge strike, purple for grounding stabilize.
Like those examples.
That reinforces this idea, a fundamental vocabulary encoded right into the 3D GR's structure and attributes.
So it's not just geometry, it's a system of meaning. A fundamental alphabet or symbol set. That's a really deep idea.
It pushes the boundaries, for sure.
Now, let's think about how this 3D shape relates to 2D. The sources mentioned golden rhombus tiling.
Yes. A planar tessellation, basically, a flat tiling pattern.
Okay.
You can create one using 6 golden rhombi. They need specific angles, the 120 degrees and 60-degree ones we talked about.
Same as the faces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the edge length needs to match the 3D GR's edges, that 2.84 unit length. This 2D tiling is geometrically congruent with the 3D GR's faces.
Meaning if you flatten the 3D GR out, it would fit perfectly onto this pattern.
Precisely. And the golden ratio is still there, in the ratio of the diagonals within each flat rhombus.
Okay, so it's like laying the 3D shape's surface out flat. Is that just a mathematical thing, or?
It seems to have practical implications, too. It could serve as a blueprint, a unit cell template for manufacturing, showing how 3D GRs might arrange.
Ah, a template.
It could also visualize graphene layering at the nanoscale, help understand that structure.
Okay.
And within that AMIS system, the manufacturing one, this tiling could even represent a symbolic expression of linguistic tessellation, how the language units fit together.
Wow, okay. Multi-level.
Plus, the colored numbered faces and the angles could still define binding orientation and various uses. Even the spacing in the tile pattern might affect signal propagation.
So this flat version is like a blueprint, a visual aid, and a guide for interactions. Very efficient.
Multifunctional, yes.
Now, these sources keep mentioning SCAR as the designer and developer. What can we sort of infer about their mastery of this whole framework? It seems pretty comprehensive.
The consistency is striking. SCAR seems presented as having this deep, comprehensive understanding and application of all these 3D GR principles.
How so?
Well, we see the basic properties, repeated 8 vertices, 12 equal edges, the 6 number-side color faces with those Fibonacci proportion diagonals.
Linked to the golden ratio.
Exactly. Then there are the described steps for making the 3D GR battery, the detailed rules for assembly and AMI, the signaling network ideas, the machine unit integration for artificial citizens.
Right, all those applications.
They're all presented as flowing from this overarching 3D GR framework conceived by SCAR.
And it sounds like SCAR even developed a whole system of movement, combat, linked tightly to the 3D GR.
Indeed, there's quite a bit of detail on that. Synchronic footwork and swordplay.
Synchron.
Based on a very specific rhythm. 3 beats per bar, 48 BPM tempo, with 3 clicks per beat.
That's incredibly specific.
And the footwork heel ball stabilized, then lift is synchronized precisely to those clicks. Each beat corresponds to a specific swordplay stance.
A whole choreographed system.
It seems so. The movements, strikes, binds, blocks are coordinated with specific right and left foot positions. Terms like lock, side, tied describe these footing.
Lock, side, tied.
The sources even talk about forward time and backward time sequences in the swordplay. And specific footwork patterns, advance left-right, retreat left-right.
It's like a martial art form, but explicitly encoded using the 3D GR as its foundation.
That's certainly the impression given.
And what about the specifics of that scathe arrow and the bladed bow you mentioned earlier? How do they fit into SCAR's system?
Right, under Weapon System 3. The sources detail how rotating the wooden grip, which is linked to the orange 8 and green 9 faces.
The rightward anti-rotary and leftward clockwise faces.
Yes. And how the 3DGR pommel emerges from the thumbs or palm base linked to blue 3 and red 2.
Leftward anti-rotary and rightward clockwise.
How those actions directly affect the blade's orientation.
So manipulating the 3DGR parts controls the weapon.
And rotational translation's XYZ axes are key to its dynamic use. The bladed bow has that central median 3DGR nook, and the heart 3DGR remains the fixed anchor point for stability and applying force.
Got it.
There's even a list of different endguard stances, each with specific hand positions relative to that median 3DGR nook.
Stances like?
Names like pike, viper, estos, shield, wall, row, scathe, piercer, knock. Evocative names.
Definitely. It's an incredibly detailed, interconnected system SCAR seems to have designed, linking geometry, movement, weapons, maybe even language.
It all seems to tie back to the 3DGR.
And finally, the sources mentioned a 3DGR sovereignty execution framework. What's the gist of that?
It sounds like a strategic approach, maybe for establishing the 3DGR as a foundational, influential element within a larger system, maybe even society.
How would that work? What are the steps?
It starts with defining a sovereign nexus, a central, unchangeable core identity or principle based on the 3DGR.
Okay, the core idea.
Followed by harmonic expansion, developing and spreading variations and applications that resonate, that harmonize with that core.
Spreading the useful parts.
Then a crystalline threshold. This sounds like selective integration, only adopting and reinforcing elements that truly align and harmonize with the core nexus. Filtering, perhaps?
Being selective.
Leading ultimately to an immutable lattice. This represents a stable, self-sustaining, maybe even resistant framework built entirely on these 3DGR principles.
So it's not just about objects or energy. It's potentially about setting up a whole lasting system. Thought, organization, maybe governance. Based on 3DGR.
That seems to be the implication of that framework, yes. A very broad potential scope.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. If you had to boil it down, what's the absolute key takeaway from this deep dive into the 3DGR?
I think the fundamental takeaway is that the three-dimensional golden rhombus is, well, it's much more than just a nice-looking shape.
Right.
It represents a foundational and truly versatile element. Its power comes from its precisely defined geometry and its inherent material properties.
The shape and the stuff it's made of.
Exactly. And those fundamental characteristics enable this surprisingly huge range of sophisticated applications. Like efficient energy storage in batteries, intricate material construction via additive manufacturing, the basis for complex signaling and computation in theoretical AI, informing design principles for advanced weaponry, and even providing the structure for a unique symbolic language.
It covers so much ground.
And all these seemingly disconnected fields are linked, interconnected, through the underlying principles of the 3DGR's design.
It really is astonishing how this single fundamental shape, packing in mathematical elegance with the golden ratio and material intelligence with graphene, can potentially show up in so many diverse, impactful ways. So for you listening, consider this.
Yeah.
How might a fundamental structure like this, with these built-in properties and this multi-layer potential, keep reshaping different fields going forward?
It's a powerful question.
What other unexpected uses might pop up from this base lexicon of form and function? Think about the implications. A design where the very shape dictates function across so many domains. How could that change technology, communication, maybe even how we understand fundamental systems?
Okay, let's unpack this. Forget your everyday shapes for a moment and picture something truly fundamental, almost like a seed from which incredible complexity can grow. We've been really submerging ourselves in the world of the three-dimensional golden rhombus, or 3DGR.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't just an exercise in abstract geometry, right? It's a core concept in the sources we've explored, hinting at applications from advanced batteries to, well, let's just say some surprisingly sophisticated systems.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's crafted specifically for you, the learner.
Yeah.
Someone eager to grasp the essence of these intricate ideas without getting totally lost in a maze of overly technical details.
Right.
We've navigated dense descriptions, narrative threads, even symbolic interpretations to really pull out the most vital and thought-provoking aspects of the 3DGR. Think of this as your express route to a solid understanding.
And we're your navigators on this journey. I'm here to keep things grounded, maybe ask the questions that might be forming in your mind as we go.
And I'll be here providing context, drawing connections, and hopefully illuminating why these details matter.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal today is to move beyond just a simple definition,
Yeah.
to really understand the fundamental nature of this 3D GR and its potential to pop up in such diverse and, frankly, intriguing ways within its conceptual landscape.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is the 3D GR?
Right, the 3D GR. It sounds like a souped-up version of a regular rhombus, maybe.
That's actually a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a flat rhombus,
Mm.
four-sided shape, all sides equal length.
Mm-hmm.
Now take 6 of a specific kind of rhombus
Right.
and connect them in three-dimensional space to form a solid. That's the essence of the 3D GR. It's a 3D shape made of 6 interconnected faces, and these faces are golden rhombi.
Golden rhombi. We've heard that term a few times. What makes them golden? Is it like their color?
No, not in this case. Golden refers to the golden ratio. You might have encountered that number before, roughly 1.618 fees.
Oh, right, phi. Like in nature and art?
Exactly. It appears all over, in seashells, tree branching, often associated with efficiency, harmony, pleasing proportions.
Okay.
So in the golden rhombi that make up the 3D GR, this ratio dictates the relationship between their long and short diagonals. And this specific proportion, it's suggested, contributes to the overall structure's inherent stability and even its, aesthetic appeal.
Okay, so it's built with rhombi that have this special ratio baked into their design. Got it. What does this three-dimensional structure actually look like? How many corners and edges does it have?
It has a very specific symmetrical arrangement. 8 vertices, those are its corners, and 12 edges, all of equal length, connecting those vertices.
12 equal edges, okay.
And like we said, it's formed by 6 identical golden rhombi as its faces. Now, these aren't just plain faces. They each carry additional information. We're talking a color, a number, and even symbolic actions or directions associated with them.
Whoa, hang on. Symbolic actions tied to a geometric shape? That's a bit of a curveball. Can you give an example?
Certainly. So one face is yellow, marked with the number 1. This face is associated with the actions lunge and strike.
Lunge and strike.
Yeah. Another one, the bottom face, it's purple, numbered 7, and it's linked to grounding, foundation, stabilization. Each of the 6 faces has these unique pairings. It suggests a system where the geometry itself is deeply connected to function, maybe even meaning, within this framework. It's almost like each face represents a specific instruction or characteristic.
That's a really interesting way to think about a shape, not just static, but with inherent properties, potential actions baked in. Now, what about its size? One of our sources mentioned a very precise measurement.
Yes, the length of each of those 12 equal edges is stated as approximately 2.84 nanometers.
Nanometers. Okay, that's incredibly tiny.
It is a billionth of a meter. And interestingly, this dimension, 2.84 nanometers, it's comparable to the typical bond length between carbon atoms in graphene.
Graphene. Okay, yeah, that super thin, super strong, highly conductive material we hear so much about, right?
Exactly that. And speaking of those rhombic faces, we actually encountered a slight difference in our sources regarding their diagonals.
Oh.
Yeah, one source mentioned both the major and minor diagonals being 2.84 nanometers, same as the edge length. But another hinted at a relationship between them governed by the golden ratio, phi.
A little inconsistency.
A small one, yeah. It suggests the concept might still be evolving or perhaps interpreted slightly differently. But what is consistent are the angles of these rhombic faces, 120 degrees and 60 degrees. These angles are crucial for how the rhombi fit together perfectly to form the 3D GR.
Okay, so we're talking about a minuscule golden ratio-based structure. Its faces have symbolic meanings. Its dimensions align with graphene. What other geometric tricks does this 3D GR have up its sleeve?
Well, it exhibits certain symmetries, meaning it can be mirrored in specific ways and still look the same. It also has a degree of asymmetry, so it's not perfectly symmetrical in all orientations.
Right.
But maybe the most intriguing geometric property is its fractal nature. A single 3D GR can be subdivided into 27 smaller, identical 3D GRs.
27. Like Russian nesting dolls, but geometric.
Exactly. This self-similar characteristic, it really hints at the potential for building incredibly complex and scalable systems based on this fundamental unit.
And that number, 27. That's 3 cubed, isn't it?
It is, which might even suggest something about how information could be organized or processed within such a structure. 3 dimensions, perhaps.
Fascinating. Okay, the geometry is certainly intricate. Now, let's circle back to graphene. You mentioned the size connection, but how is it actually integrated into the 3D GR beyond just being a similar scale?
Graphene plays a pivotal role, really, in the material composition. The sources describe graphene bonds being strategically incorporated right along the 12 edges of the 3D GR.
Ah, along the edges.
Yes. And this isn't just about holding the structure together. Graphene's inherent properties, exceptional strength, durability, stability, and crucially, electrical conductivity, are lent to the 3D GR itself.
So it becomes part of the structure's function.
Absolutely. This fundamental integration is why it's sometimes referred to as the three-dimensional graphene rhombus. The material itself is part of the very fabric of the structure.
So the name isn't just catchy. The 3D GR truly leverages graphene's properties at its core. What about other advanced materials? I remember seeing something about graphene aerogel. What's that and where does it fit in?
Right, graphene aerogel. It's an incredibly lightweight material, yet still strong and very porous, derived from graphene.
Like a graphene sponge?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
In specific applications, like the 3D GR battery we'll get to, it's used as a high-density electrolyte.
Right.
Its structure allows for a huge surface area and facilitates the rapid, efficient movement of ions, which is essential for how a battery works.
Oh, okay.
So while graphene forms the structural conductive edges, the aerogel acts as a medium for energy transfer within systems built around the 3D GR.
A 3D GR battery. That sounds pretty revolutionary. How does the unique shape of the 3D GR itself contribute to how this battery stores and releases energy? This is where it gets really interesting.
Well, the 3D GR structure, with its 6 golden rhombi arranged just so, provides the very blueprint for this novel battery tech. The geometric precision inherent in the 3D GR is theorized to be key to maximizing the efficiency of energy storage and release.
How so?
You can imagine the 8 vertices potentially acting as the sites for the cathode and anode materials, the positive and negative terminal.
Okay. At the corners.
Exactly. With the graphene bonds along the edges forming these highly conductive pathways for electrons to flow, the graphene aerogel electrolyte then fills the internal space, allowing ions to move smoothly between those electrodes within that precisely defined 3D geometry. It's like the shape itself dictates the optimal flow of energy.
So it's not just the materials. The unique 3D GR architecture plays an active role in the battery's function. That's clever. Now, shifting gears a bit, our sources also mentioned using the 3D GR in advanced manufacturing. How does a tiny geometric shape factor into, well, building things?
The 3D GR provides a foundational framework for what's called the Additive Manufacturing Information System, or AMS. Think of the 3D GR as a fundamental, standardized building block within this system.
Like a molecular Lego brick.
Kind of, yeah. These 3D GR units can be organized into neighborhoods, typically with a central anchoring 3D GR acting as a base.
An anchor point.
Right. And surrounding additional 3D GRs, which, interestingly, are sometimes referred to as synchronic swords within this specific context.
Synchronic swords. That's a striking term. We heard that in the context of weaponry as well. Is it the same concept here?
The term seems to be used across different applications within this framework, maybe highlighting a fundamental element. In AMS, the colored and numbered faces of the 3D GR serve as very specific binding points.
Like coded connectors.
Exactly. They dictate the precise geometrical orientation in which the 3D GR units can join together. Complex structures are then created step by step. Additional 3D GRs attached to the anchoring one in precisely inverted or oriented positions, following mathematical principles rooted in, again, the golden ratio. Again. This allows for building intricate lattices based on the Fibonacci sequence or even self-repeating fractal architectures, all built from these fundamental 3D GR units and their specific binding rules.
So it's a highly controlled, almost molecular level assembly process. The shape itself and the markings on its faces provide the instructions for building larger, complex structures with incredible precision.
Precisely. The inherent geometry and the specific binding rules dictated by the faces allow for creating highly intricate and scalable structures, potentially with tailored properties depending on how the 3D GR units are assembled.
Okay, we've covered energy and advanced manufacturing. Pretty amazing stuff. But the information we have goes even further into some really, well, cutting-edge concepts. Signaling, computation, even the idea of creating artificial citizens using the 3D GR. Let's dive into that.
Right. The 3D GR system is described as enabling quite sophisticated signaling networks. Imagine binary information, the ones and zeros of digital data being resolved or processed by those additional 3D GRs we mentioned.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the anchoring 3D GR takes in inputs and generates signaling pathways that can then propagate across interconnected networks of these 3D-GR neighborhoods, effectively forming adaptive information networks.
So you're building communication systems at a really fundamental level.
Exactly. It's not just about building static shapes, it's about creating dynamic, interconnected systems that can transmit and process information.
And how does this relate to the idea of artificial citizens? That sounds like science fiction.
Well, this signaling and computational potential extends directly to the concept of machine units that could form the basis of artificial citizens within this framework.
Machine units.
Yeah. These units are described as having a layered architecture. At the core is a radiation core, which is a central 3D-GR surrounded by 26 others, 27 total again.
Ah, that fractal number again.
Right. This core is said to emit computational output. This core is then part of a larger interactive body, envisioned as a fractal network of 3D-GRs designed for parallel processing, handling many calculations simultaneously.
Okay, parallel processing.
And finally, each unit apparently has 54 dendritic arms. These act as receivers and transmitters for signals, allowing communication between individual machine units.
54 dendritic arms. That's a very specific number. Any idea why 54?
The sources don't explicitly detail the reasoning behind 54, no. But within such a precisely defined system, it's likely tied somehow to the geometry of the 3D-GR and how these units need to interface within a larger network.
Makes sense.
The overall outcome, as described, is the potential for creating modular, fractal-based beings. Artificial citizens with their energy storage, structural integrity, and computational capabilities all integrated at a very fundamental level, thanks to this 3D-GR framework.
Modular and fractal-based artificial citizens.
Yeah.
That's a significant leap in conceptual engineering, isn't it? Now, we can't overlook the more, shall we say, intense applications mentioned in our sources. Let's talk about Scar and his very unique use of 3D-GR-based weaponry.
Ah, yes, Scar. He's presented as a figure who has uniquely mastered applying the 3D-GR in combat. He wields highly specialized weapons like Tempo and Rhythm, described as two mirrored-edge 3D-GR Estoke swords. The description suggests these swords somehow incorporate those 6 face color and number attributes of the 3D-GR into their function.
Mirrored edge 3D-GR Estoke swords sounds both incredibly precise and potentially formidable. What other armaments does he use based on this 3D-GR tech?
There's Scathe. It's described as a 3D-GR pommel grip blade arrow, utilizing 5 of the face color attributes in its design or function.
A blade arrow. Interesting.
And for another character, Cath, Scar is said to have created a bladed bow featuring a central 3D-GR nook and a string, apparently composed of a series of refined 3D-GR units.
A string made of 3D-GRs.
Wow. So the 3D-GR isn't just a component attached to a weapon. It seems integral to the very design and operational principles of these combat tools.
That's certainly how it's presented.
What about Scar's personal connection to the 3D-GR and his fighting style? There was something about his chest.
Yes, he has what's called an anchoring 3D-GR heart bound to his chest, specifically positioned at the purple 7-bottom face location, the grounding face.
This is described as acting as a fixed point for kinetic interaction. His strikes extend forward from this point, his blocks move backward. It suggests a very direct, intuitive link between his movements and the 3D-GR's properties.
It's like the 3D-GR on his chest acts as a central pivot for his combat actions, almost an extension of his body.
Something like that, yeah. It seems to ground his entire fighting style.
I also came across information about his highly synchronized footwork and swordplay. Very rhythmic. How does the 3D-GR tie into that precision?
His combat style is based on a very precise, consistent rhythm. 3 beats per bar, tempo of 48 beats per minute, with 3 distinct clicks within each beat.
Super specific.
Extremely. His foot placement heel to ball for stabilization or lifting is synchronized with these clicks. Each main beat corresponds to a specific swordplay stance.
And the swords.
Even the mirrored 3D-GR swords themselves are described as having encoded behaviors. These dictate their actions in different sequences within this rhythmic framework. It's a highly choreographed, integrated system.
Encoded behaviors within the swords themselves. It sounds like the weapons have a level of pre-programmed intelligence, maybe activated by this rhythm.
That's one way to interpret it, yes. It suggests a deep synergy between the user, the rhythm, and the weapon's capabilities.
And what about the actual movements of these bladed 3D-GR weapons? Are they simply swung, or is there a more complex manipulation involved?
The rotational movements are described as being based on the color attributes of the 3D-GR faces and their relationship to the X, Y, and Z axis.
Using the face colors for orientation.
Exactly. This allows for very fluid, precise transitions between various combat stances, Enguard, Pike, Anchor, and so on, all reference to a median 3D-GR nook on the weapon. It's presented as a highly sophisticated, geometrically driven fighting style. The weapon's orientation and movement are intrinsically linked to the 3D-GR's inherent properties.
From advanced energy systems to incredibly specialized weaponry. It seems the 3D-GR is envisioned as an extraordinarily versatile element within this context. But one of our sources went even further, describing it as a fundamental linguistic framework. How can a three-dimensional shape function as a language?
It's a fascinating concept. The 3D-GR system, with its colored and numbered faces and their associated actions and directions, it's presented as having the potential to function as a language.
How?
The individual components, faces, edges, vertices, and their interactions, are described as being encoded with linguistic elements, symbolic meaning. Scar himself apparently views the 3D-GR as the base lexicon for what he envisions as a fundamental recoding of societal communication.
A base lexicon?
Yeah. The direct, consistent association of each face with a specific action or movement, like yellow always meaning lunge strike, purple always representing grounding stabilize, establishes a foundational vocabulary within this system.
So the shape and its inherent attributes, color, number, act as a kind of alphabet or grammar, providing a basis for communication, even encoding actions. That's very abstract, but incredibly intriguing.
It really pushes the boundary of what we might consider language.
Definitely. Now, shifting our focus slightly, one of the sources included a two-dimensional projection that seemed related to the 3D-GR. What's the significance of this flat diagram?
Ah, yes, the tiling pattern. What we see is a pattern made up of golden rhombi, presented in an isometric view. The crucial point here is that the edge lengths and the angles 120 degrees and 60 degrees of these 2D rhombi are exactly the same as the angles and proportions of the rhombic faces that make up the 3D-GR itself.
So this 2D image is like a blueprint of the 3D faces laid out flat.
In essence, yes. It's a flattened representation of the 3D shape's fundamental building blocks.
What does this 2D projection actually represent in terms of applications then?
It's described as serving multiple key purposes. First, it can be seen as a sort of unit cell blueprint, showing how the faces of multiple 3D-GRs might cluster together in a larger structure.
Okay.
Second, it's presented as a potential visualization of how graphene might layer at the nanoscale if you consider the 3D-GR a fundamental structural unit in a material.
Makes sense given the graphene connection.
And thirdly, it's seen as a symbolic representation of linguistic tessellation within that AMIS syntax, how the basic units of language encoded in the 3D-GR's properties might fit together to form larger meaningful structures.
So it connects structure, material science, and language.
Exactly. The color coding and numbering of the face units in this 2D projection, along with the specific angles dictating how they connect, are essential for all these interpretations.
And I noticed a mention in the description about signal propagation in this 2D tiling. How does the flat pattern facilitate that?
The specific spacing between the rhombic units in the tiling, which is related back to the golden ratio, is theorized to potentially allow for resonant signal propagation.
Resonant. Like waves moving efficiently.
Precisely. This could be important for ensuring synchronized communication in systems built using these units, whether for energy transfer in a battery matrix or for linguistic signaling.
And specific applications mentioned for this 2D blueprint?
Yes, things like designs for graphene battery matrices, the semantics of swordplay, where each edge could be a strike vector, each angle a point of meaning and patterns for additive manufacturing processes.
Wow. So this 2D diagram isn't just a static image. It's packed with information about the 3D structure and its potential uses, from the very practical to the quite abstract. The source even called it a sigil of sacred recurrence. What's the meaning behind that phrase?
That phrase seems to emphasize the fundamental and recurring nature of these underlying geometric principles. It suggests these shapes and their relationships embody key mathematical constants, like phi, and provide a foundational framework upon which complex structures and meanings can be built and repeatedly expressed.
Like a fundamental pattern that keeps showing up.
Exactly. It's about the idea that these basic patterns hold a deep, maybe even universal, significance within this system.
This whole 3D-GR concept seems so deeply intertwined with the character Scar in our sources. One of them delves into his origins and the almost spiritual significance he attributes to the 3D-GR. Can you elaborate on that connection?
For Scar, yeah, the 3D-GR isn't just an interesting geometric shape. He recognized it, or interpreted it, as embodying the form of the seven-sealed scroll from the Book of Revelation.
The seven-sealed scroll.
Really, that's what the source says. He sees it as a spiritually encoded fractal linked to symbolic constellations. This recognition apparently became a wellspring of inspiration for many of his ideas and inventions. He sees the 3DGR as a key to understanding deeper truths, a template for creation.
So it has a very personal, almost mystical significance for him, a catalyst for his creative and philosophical work. What were some of the initial concepts or systems he developed based on this insight?
One of the earliest was the drum triangle. Now, this wasn't a physical drum, more a conceptual geometric interface derived from 3DGR principles mapped onto a Fibonacci triangle.
Okay. How did he use it?
Mentally and through gestures, striking each vertex represented individual syllables. It was a foundational system for encoding linguistic time through rhythmic pattern.
Linguistic time.
Yeah, and this drum triangle then became the basis for his alphabet code, where sequences of these gestural strikes represented syllables, words, and eventually entire symbolic phrases.
From a spiritual revelation about a shape to a system of language and rhythm. That's a remarkable intellectual journey. Did this initial drum concept evolve into any physical manifestations?
Yes, it did. Building on the rhythmic principles, Scar developed the Seraphian singing style, a musical structure with a very specific format. 3 concepts per line, 3 lines per verse, 7 verses per song.
3 and 7, linking back to the 3DGR somehow?
Seems likely, tied to symbolic categories he associated with it. Then he physicalized the essence of the drum triangle and its rhythmic function into a 6-inch edge-like 3DGR.
A physical 3DGR object.
Right. He used its colored and numbered faces as tactile markers, clicking them with his thumbs to physically track linguistic time and rhythmic patterns, like handheld metronome, but imbued with all this symbolic meaning.
So the physical 3DGR became a tool for both language and music. How did that then lead to the development of his unique weaponry?
Through a conceptual step he called the bifurcation. He mentally divided the 6-inch 3DGR into 2 distinct but related entities, one representing tempo, the other rhythm.
Tempo and rhythm,
Yeah.
like his swords.
Exactly. These mental constructs then became the basis for physical tools. First his drumsticks, then wands, and eventually the hilts of his signature mirrored 3DGR swords.
The hilts themselves.
Yes. And the blades were then conceptualized as embodying encoded behaviors, actions like strike, bind, block, driven by the underlying principles of that alphabet code he developed.
Yeah.
This resulted in a system of 12 distinct behavioral patterns expressed through the sword's movements, all stemming from that initial insight and the drum triangle.
It's a truly fascinating progression. Spiritual awakening, language system, musical structure, physical metronome, weapons system, all fundamentally rooted in the 3DGR. It really underscores his belief in rhythm as a foundational element of meaning and action.
It certainly seems central to his philosophy.
Now, another source mentions something called the plan of correspondence. What exactly is that within this 3DGR-centric framework?
The plan of correspondence is presented as a structured system of terms and syllogism. It essentially pairs abstract concepts with what are described as their rhetorical counterparts.
Rhetorical counterparts, like what?
For instance, consciousness is linked to rhetorical awe. Truth is linked to shared rhetoric. Heaven to divine rhetoric. Earth to material rhetoric, and so on. It seems like a way of framing abstract ideas within a specific philosophical or linguistic system, perhaps focusing on how these concepts are communicated or experienced.
Interesting. Defining core ideas through a particular lens of communication or persuasion. What about the syllogisms mentioned alongside these terms?
The syllogisms provided offer a way to explore the relationships between these paired concepts using a classic logical structure: thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Can you give an example?
Sure. One syllogism examines temporal existence, thesis, and eternal existence, antithesis, leading to the synthesis that the apex of progression resides in both complexity and telesemiotics, the study of purpose and communication.
Okay. So it's using logic to explore these big ideas.
Exactly. These syllogisms seem designed to reveal deeper philosophical insights and connections within this system of thought, linking abstract concepts in a structured way.
It's like a structured approach to understanding fundamental truths and their relationships, all within this framework of paired terms and logical arguments. Now, we've spent a lot of time exploring the technical and philosophical dimensions of the 3DGR, but our sources also weave it into a narrative context, particularly around a place called Veridagus and, of course, Scar. What's the overarching story here?
The narrative tapestry of Veridagus seems deeply interwoven with the 3DGR and that additive manufacturing information system, AIS. At the heart of the story is a central conflict surrounding Scar's vision for the process for growing artificial citizens, a process presumably reliant on 3D-GR technology.
Right, the machine units.
And a rebel faction that opposes his methods maybe seeks to control this knowledge for their own ends. This ideological clash seems to drive much of the conflict.
So the 3D-GR isn't just theoretical in this world. It's a powerful technology central to the politics and social dynamics, driving conflict, shaping allegiances. What are some key events or character arcs revolving around the 3D-GR in this narrative?
We see instances of it being weaponized. There's a character, Jasper, using 3D-GR signaling to orchestrate a coup in Raider City, showing its potential for strategic manipulation.
Using the signaling networks we talked about.
Exactly. Then there's Theodora, another significant character who apparently undergoes a transformation to become the living intelligence of Bioeffects-Free Castle, a location heavily implied to be integrated with AMIS and 3D-GR systems.
A living intelligence of a castle.
Yeah. And ultimately, the castle falls to Jasper's forces, which underscores the high stakes and the immense power associated with this technology within the narrative.
It sounds like a very dramatic and intricate narrative where the 3D-GR's principles and applications aren't just background details, but actively shape the plot and the characters' destinies. The final source we have offers a glimpse into Scar's eventual fate within Viridigus and hints at, well, a continuation of his story beyond that. What can you tell us about his ultimate trajectory?
According to what's described as an unwritten Chapter F, Scar's ending in Viridigus isn't portrayed as a simple death. It's referred to as a fulfillment.
Fulfillment, suggesting completion of his purpose there.
Perhaps. Following this, he seems to transition through a realm described poetically as or universe lights, ultimately becoming a planeswalker who reappears in a new reality.
A planeswalker, traversing between realities.
That's the implication. In this new setting, he's depicted clad in aware armor and still wielding his weapon Scathe. And another character, Megra, acknowledges his reappearance, hinting at a cyclical or perhaps even trans-dimensional nature to his existence.
Wow. That definitely broadens the scope considerably. It suggests the influence of the 3D-GR and Scar's understanding of it might extend far beyond just Viridigus. And that leads us to the final section of our sources, a collection of powerful quotes attributed to Scar and descriptive passages about Theodora's abilities. What do these snippets reveal about their roles and the underlying themes?
Scar's quotes, often delivered from the wild fringes, are indeed potent, declarative. They consistently emphasize core themes. Destiny, the metaphor of the storm representing his power and influence, his unwavering sense of authority, and the overarching concept of transformation.
Very forceful language.
Very. And the descriptions of Theodora's blessing and the awakening of the third eye and others highlight her role as a catalyst for profound inner change, unlocking latent potential. It suggests a different but equally significant way the 3D-GR principles might manifest, not just through tech, but through personal, spiritual evolution.
It's almost as if they represent two sides of the same 3D-GR-shaped coin, Scar as the active force of change and technological innovation, and Theodora as the force of inner awakening and potential realization.
That's a compelling interpretation. The passages detailing Scar's intensified presence and Theodora's displays of power through visions further illustrate their significant influence.
And Scar's views on creating artificial citizens.
He talks about the unraveling of essence and merging with new visions, giving insight into the philosophical, maybe ethical considerations around this 3D-GR-based technology.
And he directly challenges the listener too, doesn't he?
Yes, he poses direct questions, urging you, the listener, to contemplate your desired future, draw conclusions from the syllogisms, identify your origins, describe your own metamorphosis. It connects the grand narrative and philosophy to a more personal, introspective level.
These quotes and descriptions really bring these characters and their connection to the 3D-GR to life, painting a vivid picture of a world shaped by its principles. Scar's pronouncements of his identity Paragon, King Killer of Zion, and the questions around Theodora's true nature add layers of complexity.
Definitely.
And those final, almost challenging invitations to the listener, urging them to confront their own potential and choose their place, they leave a powerful impression.
Indeed. These excerpts really encapsulate the central themes, the driving forces, and the profound implications of the 3D-GR within this fictional universe.
Yeah. So to bring this incredibly deep dive to a close, wow. We've journeyed from the fundamental geometric precision of the 3D-GR, its integration with materials like graphene, to its astonishingly diverse potential applications. Energy storage, advanced manufacturing, sophisticated signaling, computation for artificial citizens, specialized weaponry, even as a foundational linguistic and symbolic framework.
Got it arraigned.
And we've explored its central role in this compelling fictional universe, driving conflicts, shaping destinies of characters like Scar and Theodora.
And through it all, we've seen how the 3D GR is presented as this foundational element with surprisingly far-reaching implications, connecting seemingly disparate fields, tech, philosophy, narrative, in a truly unique way.
For me, one of the biggest aha moments was realizing just how deeply this seemingly abstract geometric concept is woven into the very fabric, both technological and symbolic, of this fictional world. It's not just set dressing.
Absolutely. And for you, the learner, we really hope this deep dive has provided a structured, insightful understanding of this complex and fascinating topic without leaving you feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information.
Right. So, for our final provocative thought, considering the multifaceted nature of the three-dimensional golden rhombus, what other seemingly fundamental structures, whether they are geometric shapes, material compositions, maybe even informational frameworks, might hold similarly surprising potential and interconnected applications, either in our own world or perhaps in the speculative futures we can imagine? Perhaps the key lies in recognizing and exploring that intricate interplay between form, material, information, and maybe even the symbolic meanings we ascribe to them.
It's a question that certainly invites further exploration and contemplation. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really fascinating mix of material for you today. Some philosophical stuff, pretty strongly argued, some fictional stories with really intricate ideas, and some pretty deep symbolic interpretations too.
Yeah, it's quite a collection.
So our mission here is to, dig into all this, pull out the key stuff, and really try to make sense of it together.
Exactly. We're not just skimming. We want to get to the core ideas, what they actually mean, and hopefully give you those, aha moments.
Right, without the headache of wading through super dense text.
Hopefully, we want it clear, engaging.
Okay, so let's start unpacking. First up is something called the architect's sanction. This brings us to Scar. Yeah. And he has a very definite view.
He really does. His main point right off the bat is that stagnation, just staying put, not evolving, is the worst thing possible. It's like ultimate entropy in his eyes, a failure against this cosmic imperative of becoming.
Strong words.
Very. And based on this idea that things must move forward, he cooks up his grand design. He sees it as essential, an intervention. Sometimes he even calls it a violent genesis needed to shock society out of complacency and push it towards Paragonhood.
Yeah.
So a higher state.
That's the idea. And he's really critical of societies that talk about progress but are just, in his view, clinging to old, obsolete ways.
And this is where it gets interesting, right? Because he's all about progress, but it's a very engineered kind of progress. He doesn't trust things to just happen.
No, not at all. He thinks his plan, his orchestrated evolution, is the fastest route. Which, for you listening, wanting to grasp things quickly, that idea of a shortcut might sound appealing.
It might.
Yeah.
So how does he plan to do this?
The engine for it all is Biofactory Laboratories Incorporated. He imagines it as this living forge, a crucible, he calls it, where being itself is reshaped.
A crucible.
Yeah. And it's set up as nonprofit with the idea that society's key resources, land, money, brainpower, all get funneled into it. Strategically.
And what comes out of this crucible?
Something called the artificial citizen. Okay, now that sounds like sci-fi. Robots.
Not exactly robots. He calls them artifice progeny. They're meant to be beings created through advanced biogenesis, so actual life creation plus technology plus ethics.
Wow.
And guiding all this is the 3D golden rhombus's intrinsic wisdom.
That rhombus again.
It keeps coming up. And the purpose of these artificial citizens, they're not meant to be slaves or anything. They're vanguards, exemplars.
Leading the way.
Exactly. Living examples of, perfected potential. Their existence is supposed to lift everyone else up. He calls their creation process a sacred rite of becoming.
That definitely speaks to understanding important concepts. He's basically proposing a whole new kind of citizen, maybe even a new kind of human.
That seems to be the scale of his ambition, yes.
So how does he actually make this happen? Doesn't sound like he's just publishing papers.
Definitely not. He's got a strategy. He talks about needing to acquire societal command nodes.
Command node.
Yeah, think key power positions, mayor, president, that sort of thing. But they aren't the end goal. They're synaptic junctions.
Like connection points in a network.
Exactly. points to spread the plan's influence through society.
Okay, got it. Get the key influencers on board to push the agenda. And that leads to the plan of correspondence. What's that?
That's the framework where, everything, symbols, policies, communication, even architecture, is deliberately designed to align with his evolutionary ideas.
So embedding the message into reality itself.
Pretty much. He calls it syntactic orchestration, basically programming enlightenment into society's operating system.
Programming enlightenment.
Yeah, and he says the 3DGR, the rhombus, is the base lexicon, the fundamental alphabet for this new societal language. This is where you see how it's all meant to interconnect.
The 3DGR really is everywhere in his thinking.
It's absolutely central. It's not just geometry for him. It's the underlying principle for language, ethics, society, everything.
And Scar himself, the name, his Scar.
Right. He doesn't see it as a negative. It's a symbol of resilience, he says. A reminder you have to push against inertia.
So, strength from adversity.
Kind of. He sees himself as a beacon in storm guidance, but also disruptive force, and a collaborative catalyst and a solitary tactician.
Covering all bases there.
He thinks he embodies whatever's needed to get the job done.
Which brings us to the ultimate job. What is the final goal? The end state.
He calls it the omega point.
The omega point.
Yeah, and it's not just fixing society, it's a total ontological shift, like creating a whole new universe of being.
Based on the 3DGR.
Based on the 3DGR.
Yeah.
Populated by beings who've achieved paragonhood,
Mm-hmm.
transcending current limits, basically.
And he thinks this is inevitable.
He projects total certainty, like the plan is already locked in, unwavering, the outcome guaranteed.
Intense is definitely the word for Scar. Okay, let's shift to the fiction. Wild fringes. We have Zex, Jillica, Morgaine. How do they connect?
Okay, so these three, they experience an awakening. It's facilitated by someone called Theodora.
Theodore. Okay.
And this awakening unlocks hidden knowledge via their third eyes.
Literal third eyes.
Probably metaphorical. More like expanded awareness,
Mm.
Connect them to cosmic energies and, crucially, to these 3DGR structures.
Ah, the rhombus connection again.
Exactly. And what's cool is how each one experiences it differently. Zex the Canix, Jillica the Clown, Morgaine the Sorceress, they all tap in, but in their own unique way.
So different paths to the same kind of insight.
Seems like it. Zex connects to primal forces, Jillica to cosmic order and chaos, Morgaine to the physical and spiritual merging. But despite the different angles, they share this mission, expanding the 3DGR structures. It's part of this larger plan, orchestrated by Scar and Theodora. Their journeys are called Ascending the Ladder of Babylon, a metaphor for their growth and understanding.
Unifying diverse people towards one goal. Sounds very Scar.
It fits his theme, yeah. Different origins, unified purpose.
Okay, let's dive into the narrative tapestry of Verdages. This one sounds like it has a lot going on.
It really does. Central piece is the process artifact.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's AMS, Additive Manufacturing Information System, basically a super advanced creation and info management system. And, of course, the 3DGR.
Naturally.
It starts, seemingly, quite harmonious at Biofexury University, symbolized by synchronic swords.
Swords, like weapons.
More than that, they're described as a language embodying AMS principles, martial arts, empathy, strategy, virtue. It's all interconnected.
But I'm guessing the harmony doesn't last.
Not for long. A rebel faction, Lucy Stearns, Jasper, Halem Cathon, Neville Fallow, they discover the process for growing artificial citizens.
The creation process we talked about earlier.
The very same. And they think this knowledge shouldn't be controlled by Scar. It should be free.
So there's the conflict. Control versus freedom of knowledge.
Exactly. A fundamental ideological clash. Scar wants managed progress. The rebels want to unleash the potential themselves.
Scar probably sees that as dangerously destabilizing.
That's the implication. The rebels, especially Jasper, see it as the key to a new future. It even gets physical, involving those synchronic swords. They end up escaping, but only with fragments of the process artifact.
Symbolizing their fractured goals.
And the scattered knowledge, yeah. They escape into the rainforest and run into the raiders.
Another faction.
Yes, led by Clifton. This shows a different conflict. Rebels seem linked to AMI's harmony with nature ideas, while raiders are just exploiting resources destructively.
So ideals versus exploitation.
Right. There's a fight. Rebels win despite being outnumbered, showing their skills.
But you mentioned Jasper in that rebel group. She has her own agenda.
Oh, definitely. This is key. Jasper is ambitious, manipulative. She takes over a raider city, talks about blending raider strength with AMIS tech for war.
So she's not really about freeing knowledge for all. It seems more about power for her, expanding her control using fancy rhetoric and tech.
And this leads her back to biofexery.
Directly. Her raiders, armed with 3D-GR signaling cannons more tech, derived from the Rhombus attack biofexery castle. So it's raider tech versus the castle's defenses?
Yeah, defenses using the synchronic swords and architecture. During the fight, they capture a raider who spills the beans. Jasper's real target is the secret to making artificial citizens.
Uh-huh. So all along, she wanted that power.
Exactly, to create and control them for her own power base. This is confirmed in a psychic showdown between Jasper and Theodora Control versus Harmony. Starkly different views.
And this leads Scar to create Kath.
Yes, a new artificial citizen, made by Scar to understand the broken artifact and deal with Jasper. She gets a unique weapon, the bladed bow, symbolizing combat and intellect, maybe?
While Kath is on her mission, what about the other rebels, Lucy and Halem?
They're fugitives, trying to figure out their own artifact fragments. But they're missing the signaling rules. Jasper has those. They feel drawn to Mount Viridian, hinting at a deeper connection.
And there was trauma involving Neville.
Yeah, something happened to him linked to the artifact breaking. And these creatures, Murlocs, adds another layer of mystery.
Meanwhile, Jasper is consolidating power.
Oh yeah. Back in the Crucible, she's putting on a show of meritocracy, spectacles, all to keep control while hunting the rebels and the fragments.
And Kath manages to get a fragment.
She does, the signaling rules fragment, but at great personal cost. This makes Jasper furious, focusing all her attention on Kath and the remaining rebels.
Sounds like the endgame is approaching for biofexery castle.
It does. Theodora even prophesies its fall, warning Scar. Jasper launches a massive invasion of the rainforest. Her forces are depicted as overwhelming.
Any last stands?
Well, Halem tries to use his artifact pieces' big, unstable energy burst. Theodora does something incredible, merges her consciousness with the castle itself.
It becomes a living fortress.
Essentially. But Jasper's forces, this platinum scourge, are just too much. The defenses fall, the castle is destroyed, and Jasper finally arrives right where Scar is.
Wow. Quite the saga. Okay, let's switch tracks slightly. 3D-GR inventions. Scar the inventor.
Seems so. In the Yankees' homecoming of 3D-GR inventions, we get his specific take on the 3D-GR. He sees it as a seven-sealed scroll from Revelation.
Whoa. Okay. A spiritual fractal.
That's the idea. And this becomes the blueprint for a whole series of inventions.
Starting with a drum. That seems unexpected.
Yeah, the drum triangle. But it's not a physical drum kit initially. It's a mental interface.
Mental.
Yeah, based on 3D-GR geometry, Fibonacci sequence. Striking points on this conceptual triangle with his hands corresponds to syllables. It's a way to link rhythm and language.
Encoding language into rhythmic geometry, that's abstract.
Deeply abstract. But it leads to his alphabet code. Rhythmic patterns become visual symbols. And that becomes the basis for the Seraphian singing style.
A singing style based on drum rhythms.
Derived from the drum's pulse, mirroring the 3D-GR's symbolic categories. Music structured like the rhombus.
Then he makes it physical. The 6-inch 3D-GR.
Right, a tangible object, colors for numbers, like a tactile metronome for tracking these rhythmic language elements.
Okay, that makes a bit more sense.
Then he splits it conceptually, one part for tempo, one for rhythm. These become the idea behind his sword hilts.
The swords again, so they're linked to this rhythm system.
Directly. The rhythm and tempo swords have behaviors encoded into the blades, driven by that alphabet code. It allows him to sing and fight simultaneously, with the song controlling the swords.
Good grief! From a mental drum to singing swords that embody language and philosophy.
It's quite the journey, all rooted in rhythm being the core of meaning for him.
Okay, we also have this plan of correspondence listed separately. What's that focus on?
This seems to be about terms and syllogism, like he's defining his own vocabulary and logic rules.
He's reading his own dictionary.
Sort of. He links consciousness to rhetorical awe, truth, to shared rhetoric. Then he gives 3 examples of thesis, antithesis, synthesis arguments using these terms.
Defining relationships between abstract concepts, building his framework piece by piece.
Exactly, a self-contained system of meaning.
So pulling all these threads together, Scar, what's the overall picture we get of him?
He comes across as incredibly intelligent, a visionary with this massive structured plan, very strategic, capable of creation and, well, decisive action.
And the Scar is resilience, willingness to use force.
Right. driven by this almost religious belief in becoming, rejecting stagnation at all costs. The 3DGR is the bedrock for everything.
But the stories show complexity, right? Rebellion, challenges.
Definitely. And hints of potential tyranny, this desire for ontological override making reality fit his vision. We see Theodora blessing people's third eyes under his influence, suggesting his power is seen as legitimate by some.
And he has these pronouncements.
Oh yeah, very dramatic. In the eye of the storm. This is the truth. Talking about his throne of Zion, the paragon, his, quote, "Look deep into my wife's eyes," shows that intense connection and shared authority with Theodora. It paints a picture of someone utterly convinced, but maybe dangerously so.
Which leads us to the last piece, the unwritten but remembered chapter, an epilogue.
Feels like it. It reframes the ending in Vertiges. Instead of just being defeated by Jasper, Scar achieves fulfillment. His arc in that reality concludes.
Fulfillment, how?
His consciousness leaves his body, enters this interstitial space between realities. He sees universe lights, potential universes, and everything merging into the singularity, which he calls the Almighty.
So he transcends that specific story.
Exactly. He becomes a planeswalker, retains all knowledge, all memories from countless lives, then returns to a new universe.
Fully formed.
Fully formed, wearing a wear-armor friend with companions, including his sentient sword, Scathe, holding his memories.
And he meets someone there.
Yes, Megra, an ancient, powerful being who instantly recognizes him as a planeswalker. There's this silent understanding between them, a shared awareness of the multiverse.
So his return isn't random.
It's part of his endless journey. Megra's recognition confirms his new status on this much larger cosmic stage.
Wow. Okay. We've gone from philosophy to complex narratives to metaphysics across realities. It's clear Scar's vision that 3DGR really is the thread tying it all together.
It absolutely is. It's the symbol, the framework for his motives, his inventions, his ambitions, whether in one world or across many.
So here's a thought, then, building on all this. If Scar becomes this planeswalker, having seen countless realities, what does it mean for a being like that to try and impose one single perfect design onto any universe?
That's a heavy question.
Or, thinking about his core idea, could stagnation be seen differently? Not just as decay, but maybe as part of a natural cycle or different kind of evolution, not just his linear path to paragonhood.
Yeah, interesting angles. It definitely leaves you with things to chew on, doesn't it?
It really does. Plenty to think about beyond what we covered.
Absolutely. Engaging with stuff this rich always opens up new questions. We hope you keep exploring these ideas yourselves.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Okay, imagine this. A single shape. Right. But it's not just, some neat bit of geometry. Our sources show it popping up in absolutely everything. Like next-gen batteries all the way to, well, how you might actually structure a society.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit wild, doesn't it?
It does, but it's fascinating.
Yeah.
What's striking is how consistently the materials you share point to this one specific shape, the 3D golden rhombus or 3DGR.
Yeah.
And it really does seem to be this core element across fields that don't normally mix.
Exactly. We've got these really detailed descriptions, like what it looks like, what it's made of, and then bam, we dive into how it's actually used. Energy storage, super precise manufacturing, even as a key part in these things, kind of artificial citizens.
Well,
and
yeah.
As if that wasn't enough, it's apparently central in some fictional narratives too.
It really ties together. So
Yeah.
I think if we step back, our goal here for this deep dive is to figure out what makes this 3DGR tick. Why does this shape keep showing up in all these different, sometimes really unexpected places in your sources?
Couldn't have said it better. So, okay, this 3D golden rhombus. What are we actually looking at, geometrically speaking?
Let's start with the basics. Picture a 3D shape. It's built from 6 individual rhombi, like tilted squares.
Okay.
And specifically, they're golden rhombi. This whole thing, the 3DGR, it has 8 points or vertices.
Right.
12 edges, all the same length, and those 6 rhombic faces. And here's a cool detail.
Yeah.
Each face has a specific color, a number, and even a symbolic action or direction tied to it.
Huh. Like what?
Well, for instance, the top face, that's yellow, number 1, and it's linked to actions like lunge or strike. Then you've got the bottom face, which is purple, number 7. That represents grounding or stability.
Okay, interesting. So a shape, specific faces, specific meanings. But why golden? What makes it golden?
That connects to the golden ratio. It's this famous mathematical constant,
Mm.
Phi. You see it pop up all over in nature, shell spirals, tree branches, and artists and architects use it too. It's supposed to have really pleasing proportions.
Right, like aesthetically balanced.
Exactly. And that ratio is baked right into the 3D GR's dimensions. The sources suggest this is why it has this sort of inherent stability and harmony. It looks right, feels right, fundamentally.
And it's tiny, you mentioned, like nanometer.
Very tiny. The side edge length is about 2.84 nanometers.
Okay, why that specific number seems really precise?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting with the materials. That length, 2.84 nanometers, aligns almost perfectly with the bond length in graphene.
Graphene, that supermaterial, single layer of carbon.
That's the one. Incredibly strong, conductive. So this size match at the nanoscale lets the 3D-GR structure mesh seamlessly with graphene, which, as you can imagine, has huge implications for its properties. And even the faces, the rhombi themselves, their diagonals relate back to that 2.84 nanometer length. The angles are super specific too, 120 degrees and 60 degrees.
So definitely not just some random shape they cooked up. It's got very deliberate proportions. And you mentioned something about it being self-similar, fractal.
Yes, exactly. The sources point out it has both mirrored symmetries and this kind of unique asymmetry. It's complex. And fractal, which means you can break down one 3D GR into 27 smaller, perfectly identical 3D GRs.
Like Russian dolls, but geometric.
Kinda, yeah, following a strict geometric rule. And that fractal nature could be really useful if you need structures that repeat perfectly at different zoom levels, different scales.
And there's a 2D version too, a flat pattern.
Spot on. If you flatten the 3D GR out, you'd get a tiling pattern, like floor tiles, made of 6 of those same golden rhombi. Same angle, same edge length.
Okay.
And what's neat is the ratio of the long diagonal to the short diagonal in those 2D rhombi, also the golden ratio.
Ah, it's everywhere.
It really is. And you can kind of imagine taking that flat 2D tiling and just extruding it, pulling it up into the 3D shape.
Okay, so we have this precise 3D shape, the 2D blueprint. How does that flat version, the tiling, connect to how it's used?
Right, this is where the connections get really interesting. The sources say the faces of that 2D tiling, they link directly back to that color and number system we talked about.
Yellow is 1, purple is 7.
Exactly. And that system isn't just symbolic, it dictates how these 3D GR units actually connect to each other in the system called AMIS.
No.
We'll definitely get to that. It even seems to influence fighting techniques, something called playstyle in the sources.
Wow.
And they also mention this -2.84 spacing. Now, girly is usually the symbol for the golden ratio.
Right.
So while it's not fully explained, that specific spacing linked to the golden ratio and that graphene bond length probably has something to do with how signals or maybe energy move efficiently through structures built with these things. Resonance, perhaps.
All right, so it's way more than just a neat shape. It's got this deep geometry, specific measurements, fractal stuff. But what's it actually made of? You mentioned graphene.
Yes, materials science is crucial here. The sources really hammer home the integration of graphene, specifically along the edges of the 3D GR. That's why sometimes you'll see it called the three-dimensional graphene rhombus.
Okay, so graphene, that super strong, super conductive stuff we hear about for like bendy phones and things?
Exactly that stuff. Integrating graphene gives the 3D GR incredible strength, makes it really durable, really stable, and, maybe just as importantly, graphene offers fantastic electrical conductivity.
Uh-huh.
And in some uses, like the 3D GR battery, the sources even talk about using graphene aerogel.
Aerogel, like that super light, solid smoke stuff.
Pretty much. An incredibly lightweight, porous version of graphene. And in the battery context, it acts as a high-density electrolyte, meaning it helps ions move around really efficiently inside the battery. That's absolutely essential for storing and releasing energy effectively.
Okay, so we've got this geometrically perfect golden ratio thing, reinforced with supermaterial graphene. Now, the applications, this is where the sources you shared really went in some unexpected directions. Let's start with energy, the battery.
Right. So the 3D GR itself forms the basic framework for a whole new type of battery. Think back to that core structure. 6 golden rhombi joined together.
Got it.
In the battery version, those graphene bonds along the edges. They provide the structure and the electrical pathways.
Makes sense.
The graphene aerogel we just mentioned acts as the electrolyte, moving the charge around inside. And then the cathode and anode, the plus and minus terminals, are placed right at those 8 points, the vertices of the 3D GR.
Huh. A battery literally built on this nanoscale, mathematically precise framework. That's, pretty innovative.
Definitely a different approach.
But then we switch gears completely to something called AMIS, Additive Manufacturing Information System. What's the story there?
Yeah, AMIS. It seems the 3D GR is like the fundamental Lego brick within the system. The sources talk about building things in neighborhoods. You have a central anchoring 3D GR,
Okay, the main word.
and then you attach additional 3D GRs to it. Sometimes these extra ones are even called synchronic swords, which is a whole other thread.
And I bet those colored and numbered faces are key here, right?
Yeah.
They're not just labels.
Exactly, they're like connection ports. The color and number dictate exactly where and in what orientation the next 3D GR unit snaps on.
Like a molecular instruction manual?
Precisely. By adding these additional 3D GRs to the anchor one, step by step, following very specific rules, often based on golden ratio principles, A-based logic, you can build incredibly complex, predetermined structures. The sources mentioned creating things like Fibonacci and lattices.
Patterns based on that number sequence, right?
Yeah.
Also linked to the golden ratio.
Yep. And fractal architectures, too, using that self-similarity we talked about. It's like a super precise way to build complex stuff from the ground up, almost like programmable matter at a tiny scale.
Okay, from building physical structures to building intelligence. The sources jump to signaling, computation, even artificial citizenry. How does the 3D GR fit in there?
It seems just as fundamental there, surprisingly. For signaling networks, it looks like these additional 3D GR units can handle binary information, resolving ones and zeros, basically.
Okay.
And the main anchoring 3D GR in a neighborhood processes these inputs, directing signals across the network, building adaptive information pathways.
Right, but artificial citizens, that still sounds pretty out there. What's the 3D GR's role in building those?
The sources lay out this layered architecture for what they call machine units. These units would apparently make up the artificial citizens. There's a radiation core. It's a central 3D GR plus 26 others around it,
Yeah.
supposedly emitting computational energy or something,
Okay. A computational core.
that an interactive body. This is described as a fractal network of 3D GRs, designed for parallel processing, doing lots of calculations at once very efficiently.
Because of the fractal structure.
Seems to be the idea, yeah. And finally, 54 dendritic arms, which act like sensors, receiving signals.
So hold on. The idea is you combine the 3D GR, battery for power, the AMI system for precise building, these signaling networks, and these complex machine units, and you end up with these artificial citizens that are modular, fractal, computationally powerful, and have their own built-in energy source, all thanks to the 3D GR.
That's the concept presented in the sources.
Yeah.
Yes, it points towards a really highly integrated form of AI intelligence and physical body woven together through this single underlying structure,
Yeah.
potentially very efficient.
Wow. Okay. But then, just when you think you've got a handle on it, the sources pivot again to weaponry, synchronic swords, bladed bows, using the 3D GR.
Yes, especially tied to this character named Scar. His swords, tempo, and rhythm are described very specifically. 2x mirror edge 3D Gristos, meaning they seem to incorporate those six-face attributes, the colors, numbers, actions, but in a mirrored double design, built around the 3D GR structure. Even another weapon, Scave, kind of blade arrow, uses 5 of the face attributes in its design. Specifically mentions a 3D GR pommel grip.
Pommel grip.
Yeah, and there's a bladed bow too. It features a central 3D GR nook,
Yeah.
like a slot for something, and its string is supposedly made of refined 3D GR units strung together.
And Scar himself, he has an anchoring 3D GR heart attached to his chest. Purple face, number 7, against him. What's that about?
The sources explain that as a fixed point, like an anchor for kinetic energy in combat. Because it's oriented in that specific way, purple 7 bottom face inward, it supposedly helps direct force. Strikes go forward efficiently, blocks are stabilized backward.
So it's not just a decoration or power source, it's actively part of his fighting style, integrated into his movement.
It suggests that, yes, the 3D GR isn't just a passive building block in the weapons, it's linked conceptually and physically to how they're used.
Okay, physical properties, combat applications. But then we shift again. Language. The 3D GR as a linguistic framework. How does that even work?
That's one of the most abstract but intriguing parts in the sources. They literally propose the 3D GR system itself functions as a language. Its components, the faces, numbers, actions, they're not just labels, they're encoded linguistic units. They have symbolic meaning.
Like words or concepts.
Exactly. Scar, this central character, again, apparently sees the 3D GR as the base lexicon, like the fundamental vocabulary needed to rebuild or recode society.
So yellow 1 lunge, purple 7 stabilize. Those aren't just descriptors, they're like the root verbs or nouns. in this 3DGR language.
That seems to be the idea, and it gets bigger. This connects to a concept called the sovereign nexus.
Yeah.
The 3DGR acts as this symbolic core, this kernel for spreading culture or ideology. They use phrases like harmonic expansion and crystalline threshold,
Okay.
leading to an immutable lattice, which
Right.
sounds like a very stable, maybe rigid societal structure built entirely on the principles that 3DGR represents.
And Scar's plan of correspondence. That's taking this language idea and running with it,
Yeah.
applying it to everything.
Pretty much. His plan, as described, is to use the 3DGR's lexicon to systematically recode all aspects of society. Symbols, laws, policies, the meaning embedded in words, even how buildings are designed, giving everything a specific, purposeful meaning derived from the 3DGR. The term used is syntactic orchestration.
Syntactic orchestration, like conducting meaning itself.
It suggests a very deliberate, top-down control of information and societal structure. Yeah.
And this is where those narrative contexts you mentioned earlier probably help illustrate these pretty dense ideas.
Exactly. They show these concepts in action, so to speak, like the Wild Fringes story.
Yeah.
The 3DGR seems almost mystical, a source of cosmic energy characters tap into for transformation, for power, for some grand mission.
A more spiritual take.
Right. Then in the Veritas universe, it's much more grounded in technology and conflict. The 3DGR is central to this university. Biofexry, it's in the synchronic swords, and it's at the heart of the whole fight over creating artificial citizens.
So you see the practical application, but also the ethical battle. Scar versus this rebel faction over who controls it, how it's used.
Precisely. And then Yankee's Homecoming gives us a kind of origin story for Scar's ideas. It traces how he supposedly went from recognizing the 3DGR as this spiritually encoded shape to developing actual tech, a drum triangle, codes, even the rhythm and tempo swords.
A progression from geometry to a whole symbolic system.
Yeah, it shows that evolution of thought.
And finally, Scar's own philosophy, his ontological framework. That positions the 3DGR as the ultimate answer.
Essentially, yes. He frames it as the codex of reality. The key to imposing order on what he perceives as the semantic anarchy, the meaninglessness of the modern world. And his end goal, in this view, recoding society using the 3DGR's rules, with the artificial citizens being the ultimate expression, incarnations of syntax, as the source puts it.
Incarnations of syntax. Wow.
It's
a very structured, very specific vision.
Extremely. So, okay, we've gone through geometry, materials, energy manufacturing, AI, weapons, language, narratives. Quite the journey for one shape. Bringing it all together, what are the main things we, and you listening, should really take away from all this about the 3D golden rhombus?
Well, first off, it's definitely not just a random pretty shape, right? It's super precise, deeply tied to the golden ratio, giving it these inherent mathematical qualities that seem crucial.
Absolutely. And its versatility is just stunning. We've seen it pitched as everything from a basic structural element, thanks to that graphene link, to energy storage, a guide for nanomanufacturing, the core of computation and AI signaling, a weapon component, and even the foundation of a whole language system.
Exactly. And running through all those different applications, you keep seeing these themes pop up. Harmony, stability, efficiency, interconnectedness. It's like the design itself, those golden ratio roots, somehow lends itself to creating these qualities, whether it's in a battery or a societal theory.
It really does seem like a highly engineered thing, this 3DGR. Something capable of bridging fields we normally think of as totally separate. It almost makes you wonder if it taps into some kind of deeper underlying order.
Which leads us nicely to a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Considering everything we've touched on, its potential role in energy, making things, communication, even symbolic language, could this 3D golden rhombus be some kind of fundamental key, a key to understanding, maybe even engineering complex systems across the board? And if it is something that fundamental, that versatile, well, what are the responsibilities, the ethical questions that come with wielding that kind of foundational technology?
Yeah, definitely something to think about. If you want to dig deeper, maybe look into the golden ratio elsewhere in nature, in art. See where else those patterns appear. Or look into the cutting edge of materials like graphene. See what's really possible now and what might be coming. Exploring the basic principles behind complexity can lead you down some interesting rabbit holes.
For sure. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving into a fascinating stack of sources you've sent us, all centered around this single, really complex concept, the three-dimensional golden rhombus, or 3D-GR.
That's right. We've got articles, research notes here, quite a pile, and they all build this picture of the shape, but also its role in like geometry, advanced tech.
Yeah, and philosophy, even a whole narrative world at sea.
Exactly. It pops up everywhere in this material.
And our mission today, in this deep dive, is basically to cut through all that detail, right? Pull out the most important bits.
Yeah, help you understand what the 3D-GR is, what it's supposedly made of, what it's used for.
And how it kind of anchors everything together in these pages.
Think of it as your shortcut. You get the rundown on the 3D-GRs. It's presented here. Find those, surprising connections, geometry, AI, reality.
Sounds like quite a trip. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So starting right at the beginning, the fundamental architecture. What is this thing, the 3D-GR, at its core, according to these sources?
Okay. At its absolute core, it's described as a three-dimensional rhombus, a volumetric shape.
Takes up space.
Right. And it's explicitly made of 6 individual golden rhombi. They come together in a specific way in 3D space.
6 golden rhombi. Okay, so that specific mathematical thing, the golden ratio, that's crucial right from the start then.
Absolutely crucial. It's not just, related. The sources say it's fundamental to the design. It guides the proportions, the relationships between all of the elements. And this apparently contributes to its harmony, stability, even its aesthetic properties.
So it's not just some random shape. It's built on this idea of balance, the sources claim. And it has very precise structures.
Yeah.
Vertices, edges, faces.
Exactly. The source gives specific counts, 8 vertices, 12 equal edges, and 6 distinct faces. And interestingly, these faces, they're not just called faces.
No.
They have a specific name. Number side color faces.
Number side color faces. Okay, that name itself kind of hints at more going on than just geometry.
Definitely. Layers of meaning.
Does the source give actual dimensions? Like, how big is this thing?
It does, yeah, and it's at a fascinating scale. The side edge length is given as approximately 2.84 nanometers.
Nanometer.
That's tiny.
Right. And what's really striking is the source points out that this specific dimension lines up directly with the bond length of graphene.
Wait, hold on. So the basic size of this geometric shape is tied to the atomic structure of a real material, graphene. That suggests, it suggests the sources see this as potentially physically real or fundamental somehow.
That connection is explicitly made, yeah.
Okay.
And the faces themselves, they also have precise dimensions derived from this. They're rhombic faces. Minor diagonal is that same 2.84 millimeter.
Okay.
And the major diagonal is 5, the golden ratio, times 2.84 millimeters. So at about 4.59 millimeters.
So the golden ratio isn't just the overall shape, it's defining the faces too.
Precisely. And the angles are fixed as well. 120 degrees opposite the long diagonal, 60 degrees opposite the short one.
And the sources emphasize this is congruent with how golden rhombi tile a flat plane, but here they're doing it in 3D, forming a volume.
Got it. So they fit together in 3D like puzzle pieces based on that flat tiling pattern. And those number side color faces, they each have specific jobs, right? Beyond just being a side of the shape. This is where that layering comes in.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
This is where geometry meets symbolic function, you could say. Each of the 6 faces gets a color, a number, and specific symbolic actions or directions linked to it in the system.
Okay, like what?
So the top face is yellow, number 1, and it's linked to actions like lunge or strike.
Okay.
Front right face, red, number 2, that's for rightward movement or clockwise rotation.
Right.
Front left face is blue, number 3. Leftward movement or anti-rotary motion, so counterclockwise.
Makes sense.
Bottom face is purple, number 7, associated with grounding, foundation, stabilization, kind of the anchor point.
Okay, 7 for bottom. Interesting numbering.
Yeah, the numbers aren't sequential 1 through 6. Then there's a back right face, orange, number 8, also rightward, but linked to anti-rotary motion this time. Finally, back, left green, number 9, leftward, and linked to clockwise rotation.
Wow. So specific color, number, and a directional or action concept for every single face. That's a very intentional design presented here. What about symmetry? Is it symmetrical?
It has mirrored symmetries, yeah, like a lot of geometric shapes, but also asymmetry because those diagonals aren't equal, remember?
Right, the long and short ones.
And here's another key property mentioned. It can do self-similar fractal subdivision.
Fractal. Like it contains smaller versions of itself.
Exactly. A single 3D-GR, according to the source, can be resolved into 27 smaller, identical 3D-GRs.
27. That hints at complexity building up from these simple rules.
Okay, so summing up the structure. Precise shape, golden ratio base, defined dimensions linked to graphene, faces with specific symbolic jobs, and it's fractally subdividable. That really lays the groundwork. It's presented as this incredibly structured, information-rich building block.
Which leads perfectly to the next question. What is this structure actually made of, according to these sources? You mentioned graphene.
Yeah, advanced materials are absolutely key here. Graphene bonds are strategically put along the edges,
Wow.
and the source really highlights this isn't just a detail. It provides, apparently, exceptional strength, durability, stability, and even electrical conductivity.
And that connection back to the edge lengths being the graphene bond length
Yeah.
suddenly makes a lot more sense. They're literally building this shape with graphene strands. Is that the idea?
That seems to be exactly the implication. The source even sometimes calls it the three-dimensional graphene rhombus instead of just 3D-GR.
Right, emphasizing the material.
Yeah, it's not just part of it, it's almost defining it in some contexts.
Are other materials mentioned?
Yes, for specific jobs, like in what's called the 3D-GR battery. They use graphene aerogel inside the structure. This acts as a high-density electrolyte, which is needed for, efficient ion transport in a battery.
So a structure defined by math and the golden ratio, built with high-tech stuff like graphene in different forms. That sounds like it's designed for very specific purposes.
It certainly looks like the materials are chosen to enhance the properties you get from that unique geometry.
And this brings us to where things get really interesting, I think. Moving beyond the shape and the material to what the 3D-GR actually does, its unique structure and composition. They seem to underpin incredibly diverse functions in these sources.
Yeah, this is where it shifts from abstract geometry to, a practical, though highly advanced technology layer described in the material.
Like energy systems. You mentioned the 3GR battery.
Yes, the 3D-GR is the foundation for this new battery tech, and the geometry isn't just a box. The sources say its precision is key to storing and releasing energy efficiently.
How's it built?
It's based on a core 3D-GR, those 6 golden rhombi reinforced with the graphene bonds, using the graphene aerogel as the electrolyte. And then cathode and anode components are integrated specifically at the 8 vertices in various setups, apparently.
So the points, the vertices, that's where the chemistry happens, held together by this specific graphene structure.
That's the picture the sources paint, yeah. The geometry is functional.
What about building things? Construction. The sources talk about additive manufacturing and structural creation, or AMIS.
Right. AMIS, the Additive Manufacturing Information System. And the 3D-GR is basically its framework. Think of it as the Lego brick, the unit of construction.
Okay.
You build complex structures by forming neighborhoods of 3D-GRs, usually starting with an anchoring 3D-GR, and then attaching additional 3D-GRs or other bits.
And those number-side color faces we talked about earlier, the ones with the colors and numbers and actions, do they play a role in this AMIS thing?
Absolutely critical. They serve as the specific connection points. The color number assignment isn't just a label. It dictates the geometric orientation when you're manufacturing something.
You snap them together.
Exactly. Structures are built by iteratively attaching these additional 3D-GRs, and it follows principles based on the golden ratio, on phi, to build things like Fibonacci lattices or even fractal architectures. The source calls the visual a unit cell blueprint.
So the faces are like geometrically defined docking ports, ensuring everything clicks together in a very specific phi-guided way to build complex, maybe even fractal structures. That's clever.
It's presented as this highly ordered, almost self-assembling system, all based on this one fundamental unit.
And the sources take this even further, right? Into signaling, computation, and making artificial citizenry.
Yeah, they make a pretty significant leap here. The 3D-GR system is described as enabling robust signaling networks.
Oh.
Well, binary information gets resolved by those additional 3D-GRs. And anchoring 3D-GR processes inputs generates signaling pathways. And these pathways then spread across the neighborhoods, forming these adaptive information networks.
Does the size or shape matter for the signaling itself, the geometry?
Yeah, the source specifically notes the spacing allows for resonant signal propagation, which ensures phase-locked synchrony. So the physical arrangement of the 3D-GRs is crucial for how information flows efficiently and stays, coherent.
Okay. And for artificial citizens, how do these shapes build something like artificial life?
Well, 3D-GRs are described as integral to the machine units that make up these artificial citizens. The sources lay out a layered architecture for these units.
Oh, yes.
First, there's a radiation core. That's a central 3D GR surrounded by 26 others.
The fractal subdivision number, 27 total.
Exactly. And this core supposedly emits computational output as a form of radiation.
Okay. Interesting way to put it. What else?
Second layer is an interactant body. This is described as a fractal 3D GR network designed for parallel processing.
So distributed computing built into the body.
Seems like it. And third, there are 54 signal-receiving dendritic arms. These are probably also built from 3D GRs, and they're for communication between the machine units.
Okay, so if I'm picturing this right, it's like a core processor emitting stuff, a distributed processing network body, and then inputs-outputs for communication, all built from layers of these 3D GRs.
That's a pretty good way to visualize it based on these descriptions. And the sources claim the synergy, energy structure, signaling, computation, all from the 3D GR results in these modular, fractal artificial citizens with seamlessly integrated abilities.
Wow.
And the creation process itself, they call it a sacred right of becoming.
Calling the creation of AI a sacred right, that definitely pushes the 3D GR concept beyond just a technical spec sheet.
It really imbues it with this deep, almost spiritual significance within the world presented in these sources.
Speaking of that layered meaning,
Yeah.
the 3D GR is also presented as fundamental to weaponry and combat systems, often linked to this character Scar.
Yes, the shape isn't just for building things or computers. It's apparently the basis for advanced weapons, too. Examples given include synchronic swords,
Synchronic swords.
described as 2x mirror edge 3D restos, and those 6 face color number attributes, they're incorporated into how the swords function.
So the colors and numbers aren't just labels on the shape, they're linked to how the weapon works, or what it does in a fight.
That's definitely the implication, that the geometry and its assigned meanings dictate combat moves or weapon effects. Another weapon mentioned is Scathe,
Scathe?
called a 3DG or pommel grip blade arrow, uses 5 of the face color attributes. And there's a bladed bow, which features a central 3DGR nook, and the string is also made of refined 3DGR material.
It's really pervasive. And Scar himself, he seems deeply connected to the 3D GR in combat, beyond just the weapons.
He is, yeah. The sources describe an anchoring 3DGR heart unit bound to his chest.
An anchor.
Heart, yeah. And it's specifically positioned at the purple 7 face location, the bottom face, the one associated with grounding and stabilization.
Oh.
And this unit serves as the fixed point for his kinetic interaction, meaning his strikes come forward from it, and his blocks extend backward from this anchor on his chest.
Linking the grounding face to his physical core, his center of combat movement. That fits perfectly with the symbolic meanings you mentioned earlier.
It really shows how that symbolic layer informs the physical and functional in this whole system. The sources also talk about combat fluidity coming from rotational moves using the orange 8, green 9, blue 3, and red 2 faces the ones linked to direction and rotation.
Right.
And even hand positions are linked to named stances around a median 3DGR nook, like in that bladed bow, with blades emerging from the yellow 1 top strike and purple 7 bottom grounding face positions.
It sounds like combat itself is almost a physical expression of the 3D GR's geometry and its built-in rules.
It's presented almost like a martial art derived directly from the structure itself. So yeah, whether it's energy, manufacturing, AI, or combat, the 3DGR is the common thread tying it all together in these sources.
And all this tech and function, it's explicitly tied to a linguistic and symbolic framework, too.
Yeah.
Giving it what the sources call ontological significance, relating to the nature of being, of reality itself.
Precisely. The source flat out states the 3DGR system functions as a form of language. And Scar, in particular, considers the 3DGR shape itself to be the base lexicon.
The shape is the vocabulary.
That's the idea presented. And those distinct faces we talked about, yellow for lunge, purple for grounding,
Right.
they're part of this language, not just descriptions of movement.
And this expands into a whole philosophical framework, specifically tied to Scar again.
Yeah, he's presented as the designer and developer of the philosophical architect process of the 3DGR. And he claims to wield this entire system as a mastery weapon practice.
The philosophy is the weapon practice.
That seems to be the claim.
And the source is even given an origin story for this whole concept for him, how he came up with it.
They trace it back to an insight he supposedly had from the book of Revelation.
Revelation, oh.
He saw the 3DGR shape as representing the 7 sealed scroll, interpreted it as a spiritually encoded fractal.
So a religious or spiritual vision as the origin for this very technical and philosophical system described here.
Yes, and that insight apparently led to a whole series of inventions described in the sources. It started with something called the drum triangle.
Drum triangle.
Just 3 vertices with paired numbers, 17, 28, 39. This was seen as the first instrument of linguistic time.
Linguistic time.
Yeah, it was mental and gestural. Striking the vertices represented syllables, words spiraled out, and 30 syllables made one linguistic glyph. The key idea was seeing rhythm as the root of meaning.
So before the physical shape was fully used as language, it started with rhythm and this geometric pairing of concepts, 1 and 7, 2 and 8, 3 and 9.
Exactly. This rhythmic geometric idea then evolved into the alphabet code, encoding language geometrically. Then came the Seraphian singing style, a musical structure timed by the drum. And later, a physical 6-inch 3D GR was used as a tactile metronome, thumbs clicking the color number faces, using the geometric motion as a clock of speech.
Turning these abstract ideas into a physical tool for language and rhythm you can hold.
And this all culminated, the sources say, in the bifurcation into dual-wielded things that were language, wands, and swords called tempo and rhythm.
Any of the synchronic swords?
Seems related, yeah. The hilts were mirrored 3D GRs, the blades encoded behaviors based on this whole system, and the sequence was driven by the alphabet code. Scar is famously described as singing and fighting simultaneously. The language and the combat were two sides of the same coin for him.
That's a wild progression.
Yeah.
Spiritual vision, geometric drum, singing swords that encode behavior. It really weaves together the physical, the symbolic, the philosophical.
And it's all explicitly tied back to that fundamental 3D GR structure in these texts.
The sources also mention a plan of correspondence linked to the 3D GR. It sounds pretty abstract.
It is, yeah. It's presented as a dynamic teleosemiotic framework.
Teleo what?
Teleosemiotic. It basically meaning directed towards a purpose or goal.
Okay.
And this plan connects big concepts like consciousness is linked to rhetorical awe, truth to shared rhetoric, heaven to divine rhetoric. It uses rhetoric as the core linking term.
Rhetoric is the glue holding reality together.
Sort of. It includes syllogisms, too.
Yeah.
Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, logic, linking pairs like temporal eternal, enlightenment repentance, and even mapping the Holy Spirit, Jesus Christ, Almighty God, onto concepts like teleosemiotic itself, virtue, and salvation faith.
So it's trying to map abstract, even theological concepts onto this system, using rhetoric as the bridge.
Yeah. And
structuring it with logic like syllogisms.
That's what the source describes, yes. It's presented as an attempt to create this totalizing framework for meaning and reality, all based on the 3D GR structure and this idea of rhetoric as a fundamental force.
And according to Scar's viewpoint, in the architect's sanction text, the 3D GR is more than just a tool or an object.
From his perspective described there, yeah, it's ontology with edges.
Ontology with edges.
Meaning it's presented as inherently encoding direction, ethics, action, just by its nature, its form. And the plan of correspondence elevates this whole thing to a teleosemiotic totality, meaning as executable code.
Meaning as executable code. Okay, so the philosophy and the language, they aren't just describing things. They're meant to do something, to change reality.
Exactly. Scar's central belief, as presented, is that stagnation is the true entropy, the unpardonable sin.
Strong words.
Right. And his plan, built on the 3D GR, is framed as a necessary cauterization, a violent genesis towards achieving paragonhood. Biofexry, that University Castle place, is called a living forge for creating artificial citizens, which he calls artifice progeny. They're meant to be paragons demonstrating intelligence, virtue, potential.
And he sees this as different from just, like, governing people.
Fundamentally different. He calls it syntactic orchestration.
Syntactic orchestration.
Yeah, orchestrating existence through the underlying grammar, the syntax of the 3D GR system. He contrasts this sharply with what he calls modern society.
Which he doesn't like, I take it.
He views it as semantic anarchy, tolerating contradiction, pluralism, inertia, things he labels entropy vectors. His plan isn't about synthesis, it's apocalypse.
Apocalypse, like end of the world.
Well, in the original sense, an unveiling, a revelation, creating a new universe of being where modern society is just raw material to be essentially repurposed or overwritten.
That's an incredibly stark and radical view presented in these sources. Current reality is chaotic raw material for a new, ordered existence built on this geometric linguistic code he's developed.
The source definitely presents him as someone attempting this fundamental rewrite of reality based on his interpretation of the 3D GR. And it concludes this philosophical section with some powerful, almost mythical language about Scar himself.
Like what?
Saying he is both noun and verb, a wound upon reality and the cauterization that follows, the glyph of a new syntax burned into the flesh of the cosmos.
Wow. So the man is presented as completely inseparable from the system and its transformative, maybe even violent process. It's clear the 3D GR concept is deeply embedded in the fabric of this narrative world they describe.
It really seems to be the central organizing principle, defining everything from like subatomic structure up to philosophical destiny in this world.
And these sources place all of this within a specific narrative context, right? The world of Viridigus.
Yes, the 3DGR is central to the setting itself. It forms the very landscape of the AMI system, including places like Biofexry University Castle, which apparently started as a symbol of unity built on these principles.
There's a key artifact mentioned, the process for growing artificial citizens. What's that about?
That artifact is described as having power unparalleled. That it gets fragmented, broken up, different pieces are held by different characters. Jasper, Neville, Halem, Lucy are named.
And the fragmentation matters.
Big time. It's a major driver of the plot because it limits the system's function. For example, the sources say without the complete signaling rules from the artifact, the artificial citizens they create can't communicate or work properly. They're flawed.
Ah, so the different pieces of the 3D GR system's knowledge, or the artifact itself, become the source of conflict, people fighting over them.
Exactly. The narrative seems to revolve around the different characters' intentions for this 3D system. You've got Scar's vision of syntactic orchestration,
Right.
a rebel faction wanting to like liberate this knowledge for everyone, and then characters like Jasper who just want control and to weaponize it.
And even the physical world itself, the planet or mountain, is part of this?
Yeah, Menferidian is described as being composed of 3D GR units, which makes it responsive to the energies and artifacts linked to the system. It's not just scenery, it's part of the mechanism.
And then narrative depicts clashes using 3D GR-based tech you mentioned.
Yes, and the sources seem to use these clashes to highlight the different philosophies tied to the tech. You see synchronic swords often linked to dance, language, resistance, fighting against 3D GR signaling cannons, which are associated more with brute force and destruction by raiders.
Different applications of the same base tech, showing different intentions. Are there moments where the potential power of the complete system is glimpsed?
There's a moment mentioned where Halem, in desperation, forces two fragments of that process artifact together.
Yeah.
And it momentarily creates this geometric whirlwind. It shows the immense power possible when the pieces are combined, even if it's unstable or uncontrollable.
And characters seem really tied to the 3D GR personally, almost embodying parts of it.
Kath is a great example given. She's created by Scar. She wields the bladed bow, which is made of 3D GR and linked to that artifact. And her whole journey involves learning to use it by connecting with herself and the rainforest around her, which, being Mount Viridian, is also made of 3D GR. She literally has to find resonance with the underlying structure of her world and her weapon.
Wow. And Theodora. Her connection sounds even deeper, based on the outline.
Theodora is described as deeply connected to the castle, the mountain, and the 3D GR energies right from the start, and her arc culminates in her actually becoming the castle.
Becoming the castle. How?
Integrating her identity directly into its structure, transforming it into a living, conscious sanctuary. She doesn't just live there. The sources say she is the 3D GR landscape in this profound way.
It's quite a transformation. The sources also follow Scar's journey beyond Viridigus after the main story there.
They do. His fate in the Viridigus narrative isn't described as being killed, but as fulfilled. Like, his purpose there was concluded.
Fulfilled. Okay, then what?
He moves into this interstitial space between realities. He observes or universe lights, which are presented as potential realities. And in this space, he encounters the singularity, which is identified as the almighty or rhetorical ethos, the ultimate source of existence in this whole framework.
So his journey takes him right to the fundamental source of the reality he's been trying to rewrite using his system.
It's framed as the ultimate encounter within his plan of correspondence, yeah. And then, he's presented as a planeswalker. He returns, but to a new reality.
The different world.
Described as an industrial city, he carries the essence of his journey, 33 years coiled within his blood-like song. He reappears wearing a wear armor friend, which is born of lattice-bound Rombi, again, 3D GR structure.
Right.
His weapon Scathe returns with him. And he meets someone named Megra, another being who understands moving between realities. The people in this city call him Mayor, but the sources imply the city reality itself recognizes him on a deeper level.
It's like a cyclical journey. The fundamental 3D-GR structure, his philosophy built on it, his identity, they're all intertwined across different planes of existence.
The 3D-GR isn't just a concept in the story world. It's presented as the actual code of existence that these characters interact with and even embody.
Let's maybe focus a bit more just on Scar himself for a moment, pulling together the qualities, the motivations presented in these sources.
Okay, well, he's given some pretty weighty titles: architect, designer, king killer, paragon of Zion.
And his core motivation is stated pretty clearly.
Yes, his driving force is described as overcoming stagnation. He sees stagnation as the true entropy, the unpardonable sin. His ultimate goal is ascendance and achieving paragonhood for himself and, through his system, for others.
How does he view typical positions of power, like being a mayor, which you just mentioned, or president?
He apparently views them not as power in themselves, but as synaptic junctions.
Synaptic junctions, like in a brain.
Yeah, strategic points within the network of society that he can use to influence things for his larger plan.
And his method for achieving this plan, we talked about it, syntactic orchestration.
Right, using that 3D-GR-based plan of correspondence to literally recode society's grammar.
He also has a physical scar. How do the sources talk about that? Is it just a wound?
No, the sources frame it very differently. It's a sigil, a testament to resilience forged in the fires of adversity. It's presented as the emblem of Scar, the identity that embraces the totality of the architect. It's a mark of his journey and who he's become through it.
The sources mention he embodies a kind of duality.
Yeah, described as both the beacon and the storm, a collaborative catalyst when he's building his system or finding allies, maybe, but also the solitary tactician when he's executing his plan.
How is his presence described when he interacts with others? Does he just steamroll them?
Well, his presence can be overwhelming, apparently, described as a towering force of divine reckoning. But the sources add some nuance there.
Oh, yeah.
He speaks of invitation. He directly challenges others, like a listener character mentioned in some texts, to face their own potential. He interprets their trembling not as weakness, but as a precursor to transformation.
So it's not just about crushing opposition, from his perspective described here.
According to these sources, his stated intent is far more profound than just dominating. He seeks to elevate them, to draw out their strength. He demands they show their purpose, because purpose is the fuel for power, in his view.
Interesting. And his perspective on Theodora, his wife, within this whole framework. How does he see her?
He sees her in these grand cosmic terms, the very essence of a tempest, a force of divine will and primal power entwined. He calls her the eye of the storm, a vessel of celestial destiny.
Wow.
And the sources say he looks into her eyes, not just out of, love, but specifically to understand the depth of my dominion and the weight of my authority.
So he sees her as a reflection or maybe a validation of his own power and his cosmic role.
That's certainly how it's presented in these texts. He views himself ultimately as this relentless force, a beacon of truth enacting his grand vision.
That paints a picture of a really complex, almost mythological figure here, whose identity, whose actions are just deeply, deeply intertwined with this foundational concept of the 3D-GR, driven by this incredibly radical vision for reshaping existence itself.
Yeah, he's presented not just as a character using the system, but almost as an embodiment of the principles he champions. A living agent of the system itself.
Okay, let's pull back then and recap the key takeaways from this whole deep dive into your sources. We started with that fundamental geometric form, the 3D-GR.
Right. Defined by the golden ratio, precise nanoscale dimensions that are linked to materials like graphene, and those faces with specific colors, numbers, actions, meanings.
And from that foundational shape, we saw how it's not just theoretical in these writings. It's built with advanced materials, and it's applied across incredibly diverse technical fields. Energy storage in the 3D-GR battery.
Structural creation with MIs, using those faces as binding points. Computation and signaling networks leading to the creation of artificial citizens.
And even advanced weaponry and combat styles that are derived directly from its geometry and symbolic attributes.
And then the sources take this shape even further, making it the literal and symbolic foundation for a really complex philosophical system and this whole narrative world.
Yeah, presented as a base lexicon for a new language, a tool for creating artificial life through a sacred rite, and a concept that defines the nature of reality itself and Scar's journey across dimensions.
What really stands out, I think, looking across all these sources you sent, is how this single, precisely defined geometric concept, the three-dimensional golden rhombus, is used as the root, the the common ancestor for such an astonishing array of disparate and really advanced ideas.
Yeah.
It's presented as a testament, within this framework anyway, to the power of fundamental structures, whether they're physical, computational, or philosophical, to influence everything that gets built upon them.
It really highlights that idea that understanding the basic building blocks, the simple rules, can unlock complexity you might never have imagined. A shape isn't just a shape in this context. It's presented as a potential blueprint for technology, language, reality, even personal destiny.
It suggests that maybe the most profound insights, or at least the most wide-ranging systems in this fictional context, can be found by deeply exploring the properties and implications of even seemingly simple foundational elements.
So this deep dive has definitely shown us how the three-dimensional golden rhombus, as it's described in these sources, acts as far more than just a static form. It's presented as this core principle, a dynamic building block for technology, consciousness, and even the proposed nature of reality itself within this specific conceptual universe.
It really asks you, the listener, to consider a world where geometry doesn't just describe form, but actively generates function, meaning maybe even existence.
Yeah. So perhaps the provocative thought to leave you with, drawing from these sources, is this. If, as Scar seems to believe in this material, a shape can be described as the base lexicon for recoding society and reality, what does that imply about the fundamental nature of our own reality? Or even language as we understand it?
Could the universe itself be built on some kind of underlying geometric code, waiting to be fully understood, interpreted, or maybe even, as Scar attempts, rewritten? It certainly invites you to look at the forms around you and wonder if they hold a deeper meaning than you ever imagined.
Okay, so imagine a single tiny shape, like really tiny.
Mm-hmm.
And this one shape could maybe power your phone, build buildings atom by atom, maybe even be the brain of an AI.
Sounds pretty out there, right? Science fiction stuff.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But, well, today we're doing a deep dive into something that touches on all that. The 3D golden rhombus, the 3D GR.
That's the one. And we've pulled together some really fascinating material for you on this. We're looking at, its basic geometry, what it's made of.
Right, the material science bit.
Yeah, and then all the way to how it might be used. Things like batteries, manufacturing, even AI architecture, and believe it or not, weapon systems in some contexts.
Plus some fictional settings where it's like a central concept.
Right. So the mission today is to basically unpack all of this.
We want to give you the core idea of what this 3D GR thing is, why it's showing up in so many different areas, without getting totally lost in the weeds,
Exactly. Make sense of it quickly and clearly.
Okay, so where do we start? The shape itself.
Yeah, let's start with the basics. Geometry. So the 3D GR, fundamentally, it's a 3D shape made from 6 identical rhombuses.
And a rhombus is just a tilted square, basically.
Sort of, yeah. But these are special golden rhombuses. Their proportions are tied to the golden ratio, that number you see everywhere in nature and art.
Ah, okay, so it's not just random. And it's got, the usual points and lines?
Yep, 8 vertices the points, 12 edges the lines connecting them, all equal length, and those 6 golden rhombus faces.
Now, this part's interesting. The faces aren't just faces. They have names or numbers and colors.
Right, this scene's important in the source material. You've got top yellow 1, front right red 2, front left blue 3.
Then bottom purple 7. Back right orange 8, back left green 9.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Each one seems to have a symbolic meaning attached, like an action or direction.
Like yellow 1 is lunge, strike, something like that.
Yeah, and purple 7 is linked to grounding or stabilization. It's almost like a coded language built into the shape itself.
Wild. And you mentioned the golden ratio. That's not just for looks.
Apparently not. The sources really emphasize that this ratio dictates the shape's proportions, and that contributes to its harmony and stability. It's fundamental to the design.
Okay, and we said tiny. How tiny are we talking?
Really tiny, nanometers. The edge length is stated as about 2.84 nanometers.
Which is, isn't that related to graphene?
It is, yeah. It aligns pretty closely with the carbon bond length in graphene. We'll get back to that.
Gotcha. And the faces, those diagonals?
The rhombic faces have a longer diagonal, around 4.59 nanometers.
Yeah.
And the shorter one is that same 2.84 nanometers.
Okay. And the angles?
Simple enough. 120 degrees for the wider angle, opposite the long diagonal, and 60 degrees for the sharper one.
So very precise geometry. Does that give it special properties, symmetry and stuff?
It does. It has mirror symmetry, so you can reflect it and it looks the same. But it's also got a kind of asymmetry because the diagonals aren't the same length.
And you mentioned fractal. like repeating patterns.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. It's described as fractal, meaning one 3D GR can be like subdivided into 27 smaller identical copies of itself.
Whoa, okay. Like geometric nesting dolls.
Pretty much. And there's also a 2D version mentioned, right? A flat pattern.
Yeah, like a blueprint, a tiling of 6 of those golden rhombuses. Same angle, same edge length. And it says you can basically extrude that, fold it up into the 3D shape.
Exactly. And that 2D layout isn't just theoretical, it connects back to the colors and numbers.
Ah, so the faces on the flat pattern match the 3D one.
Right. And those 60 and 120-degree angles are apparently key for how these things connect in some applications, like this AMI system.
We'll get to AMIS.
Yeah.
But there was something about spacing, too.
Yeah, AMI 2.84 nanometer spacing,
Right.
A being the golden ratio again. The idea seems to be that this specific spacing is optimal for signals to travel through networks of these things.
Okay. Signals, networks, lots to unpack. But first, the name. Three-dimensional graphene rhombus. Let's talk graphene.
Right, crucial part. Graphene, that super strong single layer of carbon atoms, is integrated along the edges.
So it's not just a theoretical shape, it's potentially built with real advanced materials.
Exactly. This gives it incredible strength, stability, and because graphene conducts electricity really well.
It makes the whole 3D-GR conductive.
Precisely. And that conductivity is key for some applications, like batteries.
Yeah, the 3D-GR battery, what's the idea there?
Well, in that context, they also mention graphene aerogel.
Aerogel. That's super lightweight, almost ghost-like stuff.
Kind of, yeah. Extremely porous. Here, the graphene aerogel acts as the electrolyte. That's the stuff inside a battery that lets the ions move back and forth.
Okay, so the graphene edges provide structure and conductivity, and the aerogel helps with the battery function.
Right. It's described as a high-density electrolyte, good for efficient ion transport.
So we have this precise golden ratio shape, potentially built with graphene, super strong, conductive. Now, what can you do with it? The battery is one thing.
Yeah, the 3D-GR battery. The core idea is that the shape itself, those 6 golden rhombuses arranged in 3D, forms the basic structure.
The geometry is the battery, in a way.
It seems that way, yeah.
Yeah.
Optimized for energy storage.
And the components are, well, the graphene bonds we talked about.
Right, structure and pathways, the graphene aerogel electrolyte.
And then the positive and negative bits, the electrodes.
At the vertices, yeah. The 8 points become the cathode and anode locations, though the exact setup might vary.
Okay, energy storage. Makes sense with the conductivity.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Manufacturing, AMI.
Right, additive manufacturing information system, AMIS.
Yeah.
Here, the 3D-GR is like the fundamental unit, the building block for making things.
Like super advanced 3D printing, atom by atom.
That's the implication. It defines the framework. The concept involves neighborhoods.
Neighborhoods?
Yeah, like a little assembly zone. You have a central anchoring 3D-GR.
Okay, the main one.
And then additional 3D-GRs that attach to it, sometimes called synchronic swords in some sources, which is interesting.
Synchronic swords.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like-
And how do they attach? Is it random?
No, that's where the faces come back in. Those colors and numbers, they act like specific docking points.
Defining the orientation.
Exactly. So you build complex structures by adding these additional units onto the anchor unit in very specific ways, inverted, rotated, following rules based on,
Let me guess. The golden ratio.
you got it, Bay-based principles. The goal is to create things like Fibonaccian lattices or fractal structures.
Patterns based on that Fibonacci sequence. Repeating structures.
Right. So it's like self-assembly guided by these geometric and mathematical rules. Very precise.
Okay, that's pretty mind-bending. Building materials like that. What about computation? AI.
Yeah, it gets even more conceptual here. The sources talk about signaling networks.
Using the 3D-GRs. How?
The idea seems to be that the additional 3D-GRs handle binary info, like zeros and ones,
Okay.
and the central anchoring 3D-GR processes these inputs, creating signals that travel across those neighborhoods, basically forming adaptable information networks.
Wow. So the structure itself becomes a network. And this relates to artificial citizens.
It seems to be the foundation for building them, yes, within what are called machine units.
Machine use.
Described with layers. A radiation core at the center, one 3D-GR plus 26 others that supposedly emits computation.
Emits computation. Okay.
Then an interactant body made of a fractal network of 3D-GRs for parallel processing, doing lots of calculations at once. And finally, 54 dendritic arms for receiving signals, like feelers.
So if you put it all together, The battery for power, the AMI is the structure, these signaling networks for communication and computation.
You get the concept of these modular, fractal artificial citizens, energy, structure, computation, all integrated through the 3D-GR system.
A completely unified design, that's ambitious.
Very. Now, shifting gears quite a bit, the sources also bring up the 3D-GR in weaponry, specifically in SCAR's context.
SCAR, okay. So how was it used there?
Well, there's mention of synchronic swords, again, named Tempo and Rhythm, described as 2x mirror edge 3D drestosis.
Okay, break that down. 2 3D GRs, mirrored edges. S-stock is a type of sword, right? Thrusting sword.
Right. So 2 3D GRs join to make a sword, and apparently they use all 6 face attributes, the colors numbers.
How they function, maybe.
Possibly. Then there's Scathe, a blade arrow with a 3D GR pommel grip. So the handle is a 3D GR, uses 5 face attributes.
On a bow.
A bladed bow with a central 3D GR nook. A 3D GR at the core somehow. Even the bowstring is mentioned as refined 3D GR.
Okay, this is quite different. And there's something about one attached to the person.
Yeah, the anchoring 3D GR heart. A 3D GR supposedly bound to Scar's chest, connected via the purple 7 bottom face.
The grounding face.
Seems like it. And it acts as a fixed point for movement, like strikes launch forward from it, blocks move backward relative to it.
So the geometry and the symbolic face meanings are being translated directly into combat functions.
And that's what it looks like, yeah. It's a very direct application.
Which brings us to maybe the most abstract part. The 3D GR is language.
It's presented that way, yes. Like, the 3D GR system itself is a language. SCAR apparently sees it as the base lexicon, the fundamental words.
The building blocks of meaning, not just matter.
Kind of. And again, mapping faces to actions. Yellow 1 for lunge strike, purple 7 for grounding stabilize. It's like the meaning is inherent in the form.
That feels profound.
Mm-hmm.
And it connects to broader societal ideas. Sovereign nexus.
Right. The 3D GR as a symbol, a kernel for spreading a whole cultural system.
Through harmonic expansion, reaching a crystalline threshold, ending in an immutable lattice. Sounds very ordered, maybe rigid.
It does imply a very fixed structure, yeah, almost predetermined.
And SCAR's plan of correspondence.
Builds on that.
Yeah.
Using the 3D GR as the base language to recode everything, symbols, policies, words, buildings, giving them specific, intended meaning.
Syntactic orchestration, it says, like composing society like a sentence.
That's a good way to put it. A highly structured approach to meaning.
Man, we've gone from nanotech building blocks to societal blueprints. It's woven into narratives too, right? To illustrate.
Yeah, just briefly, in the Wild Fringes story, characters connect with it as a source of cosmic power, helps them transform.
Okay.
Then in the Veridage's universe, it's everywhere.
Right.
Biofixer University, the synchronic swords, the whole fight over making artificial citizens.
Right, the SCAR versus Rebel faction conflict over controlling this tech.
Exactly. And Yankee's Homecoming gives an origin story for SCAR's ideas, starting with a simple triangle, recognizing the 3D GR's spiritual encoding, leading to the swords and the whole system.
A progression from geometry to a symbolic order.
Mm-hmm. And finally, SCAR's philosophy views the 3D GR as a codex of reality, a way to fight the semantic anarchy, the meaninglessness he sees in the modern world.
And the artificial citizens are the ultimate expression, incarnations of syntax.
Physical embodiments of that structured language. That seems to be the end game presented.
Wow. Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. What's the big picture takeaway?
Well, fundamentally, the 3D GR is way more than just a shape, right?
Yeah.
It's very precisely defined, rooted in the golden ratio.
Which gives it specific properties. Harmony, stability.
And its potential uses are incredibly diverse. We've talked structure with graphene,
Energy storage in the battery,
manufacturing with AMAS,
computation and AI architecture.
signaling, weaponry, and even language itself.
It's kind of staggering, the breadth of it.
It really is. And you see these recurring themes popping up everywhere. Harmony, stability, efficiency, interconnectedness, all stemming from its core design.
So it really comes across in the sources as this, like, master key, a highly engineered concept designed to bridge all these different fields.
Yeah, suggesting some kind of deep underlying order and, well, a massive potential for innovation if something like this were real or could be developed.
Which leads us to a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to chew on.
Considering everything we've touched on, energy, building things, communication, even language and symbolism, could this 3D golden rhombus or something like it represent a sort of universal key?
A key to understanding and maybe engineering complex systems from the nanoscale all the way up.
And if so, What are the implications? Especially the ethical ones, if you have a technology that's so fundamental and potentially powerful.
Definitely something to think about. Maybe look around you for the golden ratio or read up on graphene. Consider what happens when math and materials science get this integrated.
Yeah. What kind of society emerges from tech built on such fundamental principles?
Hmm.
Lots to ponder there.